My name is Casima Thompson. I am 34 years old. Last Christmas Eve, my mother stood in front of 200 elite donors in our Buckhead mansion, raised a crystal champagne flute, and told them I was too selfish to attend my own family gala. She smiled her practiced, mournful smile and told the crowd I cared more about my ambition than my own blood. My father nodded along, playing the tragic patriarch. They painted me as an ungrateful daughter who abandoned them for the holidays. What they failed to mention to those state senators and hospital board members was where I actually was. They omitted the fact that I was standing in a freezing pediatric intensive care unit, my scrubs stained with rust-colored spots, manually pumping air into the lungs of a dying 4-month-old infant. Because the life support machine failing that child was manufactured by my father's conglomerate. They thought they controlled the narrative. They thought their money and their carefully crafted victim routine would ruin my reputation. They had no idea they were a few hours away from a federal raid. Before I go any further, if the thought of parents using their own daughter as a scapegoat to hide their dark secrets makes your blood boil, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your age in the comments below. I love seeing the different generations tuning into the Linda Vengeance channel. Now, let me take you to the exact moment my family's golden facade began to crack. The high-pressure alarm on the ventilator shrieked. It was a sharp, piercing frequency that cut straight through the sterile quiet of the pediatric ICU at Atlanta General. I locked my elbows and drove my weight down into the chest of the cyanotic infant on the bed. "Push 1 milligram of epinephrine," I said. My voice carried the metallic calm of a surgeon operating on her 20th consecutive hour. The monitor above the bed flashed a persistent, rhythmic red. The oxygen saturation numbers were plummeting. The ventilator digital interface displayed a system pressure warning. I stripped off my soiled latex gloves. The sharp snap echoed off the tile walls. I grabbed a manual resuscitation bag, fitted the mask over the infant face, and squeezed. I forced air into failing lungs by hand. "It is the intake valve," my chief resident noted. His voice shook just a fraction. "The machine is not delivering the tidal volume." I spared a single second to glance at the polished chrome logo stamped onto the side of the failing ventilator casing. Apex Medical, my father's company. The financial cornerstone of the Thompson family empire. 10 miles north, inside the snow-dusted iron gates of our estate, ice clinked against fine crystal. I could picture the scene with sickening clarity, because I had lived it every winter of my life. My mother Evelyn adjusting the neckline of her emerald gown. She would be working the room, targeting the most influential guests. "It hurts, I will not lie to you," she would sigh, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. We raised Cosima to understand the value of tradition, but she always chooses her career over us. Missing Christmas Eve, refusing to even answer my calls, it is just a selfish choice. And across the grand ballroom, Richard Thompson, the esteemed CEO of Apex Medical, would catch his wife's eye and offer a fractional nod. The smear campaign was a calculated theater of philanthropy. My parents used my absence to farm social sympathy, reinforcing their status as generous, long-suffering pillars of the Georgia community. Back in the harsh fluorescent glare of the ICU, the infant pulse finally leveled into a fragile, thready rhythm. I leaned back against the stainless steel supply cart. The chill of the hospital air conditioning seeped directly into my joints. My neck ached. My muscles burned from the physical strain of chest compressions. I exhaled a slow, ragged breath and pulled my secure phone from my pocket. The screen illuminated with a new message. It was from Maya Sterling. Maya was Atlanta General Hospital's chief legal counsel. She was a razor-sharp attorney who spent her career navigating the treacherous intersection of corporate money and medical liability. She was also my closest ally. Tonight, she was standing in the shadows of the Thompson Ballroom, a mandatory guest representing the hospital administration. She was my eyes inside the estate. I tapped the screen. Maya wrote, "Your mother is holding court by the ice sculpture. She is playing the grieving parent to the governor's chief of staff." I wiped a smear of condensation from the screen with my thumb. I was unmoved by the social sabotage. I had survived my mother's public relations campaigns before. I knew the rules of their game. Keep your head down, do the work, let them have their hollow, high society applause. But a second text immediately materialized below the first. The words made my stomach drop. Maya wrote, "That is not why I am texting you. I just got a look at your father's Q4 production manifests from a careless regional manager at the open bar. The ventilator failure in your ward tonight, it is not a random mechanical glitch. Check the serial numbers on the casing." I stared at the glowing text. The labored wheeze of the manual bag filled the silence of the room. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor seemed to mock me. I stepped away from the cart, walking slowly back to the defective Apex machine. I knelt down, tracing my finger along the engraved metal plate near the exhaust port. The serial number ended in an alphanumeric sequence I recognized from a recent hospital supply acquisition form, a heavily discounted batch. My parents were not just destroying my reputation over cocktails to soothe their egos. They were actively shipping broken, compromised equipment into intensive care units. They were letting children turn blue on my operating tables to pad their end-of-year profits. A cold, singular focus replaced the exhaustion in my bones. I put my phone back in my pocket. The doors to the ICU slid open, and a nurse rushed in, her face pale. "Dr. Thompson," she said breathlessly, "we have another alarm. Bed 4. The Apex unit just locked up." It was not a single broken machine. It was a systemic failure. And it was just beginning. I sprinted toward the glass partition of bed 4. The sliding doors hissed open, revealing a 6-year-old boy thrashing weakly against his soft wrist restraints. The Apex ventilator beside his bed emitted a continuous, flat tone. The digital readout was frozen. I did not waste time checking the interface. I disconnected the corrugated plastic tubing from his endotracheal tube and attached a second manual resuscitation bag. I squeezed the pliable plastic. The air resistance felt wrong, heavy, and stiff against my palm. "Get in here," I told the junior resident hovering in the hallway. "Take over compressions on this bag. 1 breath every 3 seconds. Do not stop until I tell you." Before the resident could step up, another alarm pierced the sterile air. Bed 7, across the ward. I handed off the bag and ran. My vision blurred for a fraction of a second. I was crossing the 24-hour mark of my shift. The muscles in my lower back screamed, a dull, throbbing ache radiating down my legs. I ignored the pain. At bed 7, a newborn girl lay turning a faint, terrifying shade of blue. Her Apex unit had not just frozen. The screen was entirely black. A total power failure within the casing. "Third bag?" I ordered the charge nurse. "Call every available resident from the surgical floor. We are doing this by hand." The pediatric ICU descended into a synchronized triage. We had 3 children on life support, and 3 Apex machines had failed within 15 minutes. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic and the faint metallic tang of overheated circuitry. I moved between the beds, checking pupils, feeling for thready pulses under fragile skin, guiding the exhausted residents on the rhythm of manual ventilation. We stabilized the immediate threat. The children were breathing, but only because human hands were doing the mechanical labor. I needed to know what was failing. A power supply issue was different from a compromised intake valve. I walked to the central nursing station, my rubber clogs squeaking against the polished linoleum. I logged into the hospital intranet, bypassing the standard user interface, to access the biomedical engineering directory. Every piece of equipment in Atlanta General was networked. Every error code, every pressure drop, every software glitch was recorded in real time. I typed in the serial numbers for the 3 failed Apex units. I needed the raw data. The screen buffered. A gray loading circle spun against a white background. Then a dialog box popped up. Error. Directory not found. I frowned, rubbing the bridge of my nose to clear the grit of fatigue from my eyes. I typed the command again, assuming a network lag. Error. Data purged. Timestamp logged 14 minutes ago. I stared at the glowing green letters. The maintenance logs had not crashed. They had been intentionally deleted, right when the first machine went down. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. This was no longer a medical emergency. This was a systemic cover-up. Someone inside the hospital IT department had secure access, recognized the Apex failures, and scrubbed the evidence to protect the manufacturer, to protect my father. The hospital was actively shielding a corporate sponsor while children suffocated in the wards. My secure phone vibrated in my pocket. Maya. She was sending a live audio feed from the Buckhead estate. I pressed the speaker to my ear, keeping my eyes on the 3 residents manually keeping my patients alive. Through the static, the sound of polite applause filled the line. Then my brother spoke. Julian possessed the kind of effortless charisma that cost millions to cultivate. He was 30 years old, groomed from birth to inherit the Apex empire. His voice echoed through the grand ballroom, smooth, confident, and dripping with manufactured empathy. We live in a world where technology moves faster than compassion, Julian told the crowd of investors and politicians. But at Apex Medical, we believe our children deserve both. Our new Breath of Life pediatric line is not just a product, it is a promise of safety, a promise of reliability. We engineered these machines to be the silent guardians of the most vulnerable. I gripped the edge of the nursing station desk. My knuckles turned white. The dramatic irony was thick, suffocating. Julian stood under a crystal chandelier wearing a bespoke tuxedo, selling a promise of safety to men in tailored suits. Meanwhile, 10 miles away, I was covered in the physical reality of his lies. The silent guardians he boasted about were currently bricked on my ward, their defective valves resting useless while my medical staff fought muscle fatigue to keep infants from slipping into cardiac arrest. Julian knew about the profit margins. He knew the equipment was compromised. He was actively pitching a lethal product to secure his next quarterly bonus. The red trauma phone on the wall shattered my focus. It was the direct line from the emergency department receiving bay. I snatched the receiver. "Thompson," I said. "Dr. Thompson, we have an incoming priority transfer," the emergency attending said, his voice rushed. 8-year-old female, acute respiratory distress syndrome, secondary to a severe asthmatic event. Her airway is closing. We had to intubate in the field. ETA is 2 minutes. "Bring her straight up," I said. "Have respiratory therapy prep bed 2. "Cosima, listen to me," the attending lowered his voice. "This is not a standard admit. The patient is Lily Caldwell. Her father is Senator Marcus Caldwell. He is in the ambulance with her. The hospital director is already on his way down." Senator Caldwell? The man who sat on the state health committee? The man who approved hospital funding grants? The double doors of the ICU crashed open before I could hang up. Paramedics rushed a gurney into the room. The little girl was terrifyingly pale. Her chest barely rose as the paramedic squeezed the transport bag. Behind the stretcher, a tall man with graying temples followed, his face locked in an expression of raw, unadulterated terror. Senator Caldwell. We moved her to bed 2. I grabbed my stethoscope, listening to her chest. 0 air movement. Her lungs were tight locked up. She needed immediate, continuous mechanical ventilation with precise, positive end expiratory pressure. A human hand could not maintain the exact calibration she required to break the asthma attack. "Hook her up to the wall unit," I ordered the respiratory therapist. The therapist grabbed the corrugated tubing and connected it to the only functional machine in the bay. I looked at the sleek, polished casing. The chrome logo gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Apex Medical. It was a brand new unit from the same defective batch. I stared at the machine. If I refused to use it, the senator's daughter would suffer irreversible brain damage within minutes. If I turned it on, I was tethering her life to a mechanical time bomb engineered by my own family. I reached out and hit the power switch. The lethal ticking clock began. Cosima confronted Aris Thorne in his glass-walled office on the top floor of Atlanta General. The room smelled of lemon polish and expensive espresso, a stark contrast to the sharp bleach and metallic blood scent clinging to my scrubs. My rubber clogs left faint rust-colored smudges on the pristine cream carpets. Thorne stood behind his custom mahogany desk, silhouetted against the sweeping, snow-dusted Atlanta skyline, his tailored charcoal suit draped perfectly over his shoulders. He was a pragmatist, a man who viewed hospital administration not through the lens of patient survival, but through the cold calculus of profit and liability. He held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, the ice clinking softly as he turned to face me. "You look like a casualty of war," Cosima Thorne said. His tone was smooth, laced with a practiced, patronizing concern. "Go home. You have been on your feet for 26 hours. I need a hospital-wide recall on all Apex Medical respiratory units," I told him, keeping my voice low and steady. "I need every machine pulled from the pediatric and neonatal wards immediately. Replace them with the backup analog units from storage." Thorne set his glass down. The condensation pooled on the polished wood. "You are exhausted. You are not thinking straight. 3 ventilators failed in my unit within 15 minutes, I said, stepping closer to his desk. "The intake valves are defective, and when I tried to pull the diagnostic data, I found the network logs had been intentionally purged. Someone in your IT department is covering for the manufacturer." Thorne did not flinch. He walked over to the sprawling window. His gaze drifted downward toward the hospital's newly constructed east wing. The wing bore a sprawling bronze plaque spanning the entrance, the Richard and Evelyn Thompson Center for Pediatric Excellence. My parents had bought this hospital a long time ago. Thorne was just the man paid to manage their investment. "Do you know how much your father pledged to our endowment this quarter?" Thorne asked, his back still turned. $4 million. "I am not initiating a federal recall on our primary supplier based on the paranoid delusions of a sleep-deprived surgeon. They are suffocating children, Eris. They are delivering state-of-the-art technology," he countered, finally turning to face me. The mask of polite concern dissolved into hardened corporate defense. "You are running on pure adrenaline. Your judgment is compromised. Frankly, given your current family situation, I am not surprised you are looking for a reason to lash out at your father." My jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" Thorne picked up his tablet, tapped the screen twice, and slid it across the mahogany desk. I looked down. It was my mother's social media feed. The post had been uploaded 30 minutes ago, precisely timed to align with the peak attendance of her Christmas Eve gala. The photo featured Evelyn standing by the grand staircase of the Buckhead estate, dabbing a single, perfectly staged tear from her cheek with a lace handkerchief. The caption read, "A mother's heart breaks on Christmas. We gave our daughter the world, but some children cannot be saved from their own selfish ambitions. Praying Cosima finds her way back to the family she so callously abandoned tonight." The post already had thousands of interactions. The comments section was a digital firing squad populated by the Georgia elite. State representatives, charity board members, and old money socialites were offering their prayers for my poor, suffering parents. They called me an ungrateful narcissist. They branded me a soulless careerist. My mother was constructing a masterclass in character assassination. By framing me as an unstable, hostile daughter, she was preemptively discrediting anything I might say about the defective medical equipment. If I blew the whistle, the public would dismiss it as the bitter revenge of an estranged child. I stared at the tablet. My throat constricted, a familiar, heavy pressure building in my chest. I had spent my entire life navigating their psychological traps, but the sheer cruelty of weaponizing my absence while I kept their victims alive was a new depth of depravity. I locked the screen and pushed the tablet back toward Thorne. "My family dynamic has nothing to do with the failing intake valves on your ward," I said, keeping my expression entirely blank. "I am giving you a medical directive. Pull the machines." "Request denied," Thorne said coldly. "Go back to your ward, Dr. Thompson. Keep the patients stable. Let the technicians handle the hardware." I turned and walked out. Arguing with Thorne was a tactical dead end. I needed proof. I needed physical, undeniable evidence that the machines were shipped broken. The moment I stepped back through the double doors of the pediatric ICU, the sterile quiet shattered. The high-pressure alarm on bed 2 was screaming. I sprinted to the glass partition. Lily Caldwell, the state senator's 8-year-old daughter, was arching off the mattress. Her eyes were wide with blind panic, her small hands clutching at the bed rails. The sleek, chrome-plated Apex machine beside her was hiccuping, delivering erratic, forced bursts of air that fought against her natural lung rhythm. "She is desaturating," the respiratory therapist yelled over the alarm. "Peak inspiratory pressures are spiking into the danger zone. The ventilator is not synchronizing." Senator Caldwell stood in the corner of the room, his face drained of all color. He gripped the back of a plastic guest chair so hard his knuckles were stark white. "Do something," he demanded, his voice cracking. "Why is she turning pale?" I stepped to the head of the bed, my hands moving with practiced speed. "Disconnect the circuit," I ordered the therapist. "Give me the bag." I detached the corrugated plastic tubing from the Apex machine and clamped the manual resuscitation bag onto Lily's endotracheal tube. I began squeezing, feeling the stiff, terrifying resistance of her inflamed airways. I matched my compressions to her chest movements, overriding the machine's lethal mechanical failure with my own hands. Slowly, agonizingly, her oxygen numbers stopped dropping. The doors to the unit slid open behind me. Aris Thorne marched in. His usual calm demeanor was fractured. His eyes darted from the silenced Apex machine to the sweating senator, taking in the full, horrific political reality of the situation. Thorne realized in that instant that covering for my father might cost him the hospital's state funding. If Lily Caldwell died on his watch, the ensuing investigation would destroy his career. Thorne grabbed my arm and pulled me into the sterile supply closet, out of earshot of the senator. The harsh fluorescent light highlighted the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "What happened?" Thorne demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "The valve locked," I replied, my breathing heavy. "The machine tried to force air against a closed airway. If I had not disconnected her, it would have ruptured her lungs." "Your state-of-the-art technology almost killed a senator's child." Thorne ran a trembling hand through his silver hair. He was trapped between the Thompson endowment and the Caldwell political machine. He looked at my blood-stained scrubs, then back at the door. "You have 12 hours, Thorne hissed. 12 hours for what? To prove the units are defective from the manufacturer, Thorne said, his eyes narrowing. I cannot issue a recall without hard evidence. It will trigger a breach of contract lawsuit from your father that will bankrupt this hospital. Bring me undeniable proof that Apex Medical knew about the hardware failure. If you cannot produce that evidence by noon tomorrow, I will place you on immediate administrative leave for insubordination and assign the ward to a new attending." He stepped out of the closet, composing his face into a mask of professional reassurance as he walked over to comfort the senator. I stood alone among the sterile bandages and saline bags. 12 hours. I had to keep an entire ward alive by hand, while simultaneously uncovering a corporate conspiracy designed by a billionaire. My secure phone buzzed against my thigh. I pulled it out. Maya was still inside the gala. She had not responded to my last message about the deleted maintenance logs. Instead, she sent a single encrypted photograph. The image was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of a desk lamp. It showed the heavy mahogany door of my father's private home office. The door was strictly off limits to all guests, protected by a digital keypad and an electromagnetic lock. It was the nerve center of the Apex empire, where my father kept his most sensitive corporate communications. Beneath the photo, Maya sent a brief line of text. Your mother is distracted with the charity auction. Your brother is busy pouring scotch for the investors. I am going in. The heavy bass of the string quartet drifted through the sprawling corridors of the Buckhead estate, muffled by layers of expensive silk wallpaper. Maya Sterling stood in the darkened east wing, her back pressed against the cool plaster wall. As chief legal counsel for Atlanta General, Maya navigated boardrooms filled with predatory executives every day. She recognized corporate hubris instinctively. Richard Thompson possessed a surplus of it, which made him predictable. He believed his own home was an untouchable fortress. Maya approached the heavy mahogany door of Richard's private office. The digital keypad glowed a faint clinical blue in the dim light. During the brutal contract renegotiations between Apex Medical and the hospital last fiscal year, Maya had audited the conglomerate compliance protocols. She retained a backdoor access token, a digital key intended for emergency regulatory reviews. She plugged a small drive into the hidden port beneath the keypad. The lock clicked, yielding with a soft, metallic thud. She slipped inside, letting the door latch quietly behind her. The room smelled of aged leather floor wax and the distinct, smoky aroma of single malt scotch. Moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sprawling oak desk. Maya did not turn on the lamp. She woke the dual monitors and inserted her encrypted drive into the tower. Her fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. She bypassed the superficial folders containing philanthropic tax write-offs and public relations briefs. She dove straight into the hidden logistical servers. She searched for supply chain manifestos, material acquisitions, and internal risk assessments. Minutes ticked by. The silence of the office amplified the erratic pounding of her pulse. Then she found it. A restricted folder titled Quarter 4 Supply Chain Variances. Maya opened the primary document. It was an internal audit conducted 6 months prior. The report detailed a critical manufacturing flaw in the new Breath of Life pediatric units. The engineers explicitly warned that substituting the proprietary titanium intake valves with a cheaper composite plastic would result a high probability of mechanical lockup under continuous pressure. Below the engineering warning sat a cost-benefit analysis. The document calculated the financial penalty of a delayed product launch against the statistical likelihood of patient mortality. At the bottom of the page rested a physical scanned signature in dark blue ink. Richard Thompson. He had read the warning. He knew the valves would fail. He authorized the shipment anyway to artificially inflate the end-of-year profit margins and secure a lucrative round of investor funding. It was premeditated, calculated murder wrapped in a spreadsheet. A sudden sharp chime echoed from the hallway. Maya froze. It was the distinct sound of a crystal champagne flute tapping against a gold signet ring. Julian. He always tapped his glass when he was bored or looking for an escape from the investors. The footsteps grew louder, approaching the mahogany door. Maya initiated the file transfer, routing the encrypted dossier directly to Cosima Secure Pager. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 80%. 90%. The brass doorknob began to turn. Transfer complete. Maya snatched her drive from the tower, plunged the monitors back to sleep mode, and spun toward the heavy velvet drapes lining the library alcove. She slipped behind the thick fabric just as the door swung open. A wedge of yellow light pierced the darkness. Julian stepped into the office humming a tuneless melody. He set his glass on a side table and walked toward the oak desk. Maya held her breath, her spine pressed hard against the window frame. The scent of Julian's expensive cologne drifted into the alcove. He did not check the computer. He merely opened a lower desk drawer, retrieved a silver pill box, and swallowed a capsule dry. He grabbed his glass and walked out, pulling the door shut behind him. Maya exhaled a shaky breath, stepped out of the shadows, and immediately began planning her own exit strategy. 10 miles south, the atmosphere inside the pediatric ICU had grown toxic. Cosima wiped her hands with a sterile towel and surveyed the ward. The immediate crisis was contained, but the tension among the staff felt suffocating. It was not just the physical toll of the manual labor. It was the way the nurses averted their eyes when she walked past. It was the hesitation of the senior respiratory therapist when Cosima issued a direct order regarding Lily Caldwell oxygen mixture. Cosima walked to the central charting station. A tablet rested on the counter, the screen glowing brightly. A junior doctor hastily tried to snatch it away, but Cosima caught his wrist. "Let me see it," Cosima commanded. Her voice left no room for debate. The junior doctor swallowed hard and released the device. Cosima looked at the screen. It was a prominent regional medical blog, a publication heavily funded by pharmaceutical advertisements. The headline spanned the top in bold red letters. Lead surgeon mental health questioned amidst family feud at Atlanta General. The article was a masterpiece of stealth public relations. It cited anonymous hospital insiders claiming Cosima was exhibiting erratic, paranoid behavior on the ward. It detailed her refusal to attend her family holiday charity event, framing it as a symptom of a broader psychological breakdown. The piece subtly suggested her decision to disconnect state-of-the-art Apex machines from critical patients was not a heroic medical intervention, but a dangerous, vindictive stunt aimed at punishing her father. Richard Public Relations firm was working fast. They were seeding the narrative, poisoning the well. By morning, the hospital board would view her as a liability, and the staff would refuse to follow her protocols. They were isolating her, turning her own medical team into a wall of suspicion. Cosima set the tablet down. The junior doctor refused to meet her gaze. She realized Thorne had likely sanctioned the leak to build a paper trail for her termination. Before Cosima could address the room, her secure pager vibrated at her hip. A specialized alert tone signaled an encrypted file drop. Cosima stepped away from the charting station and walked into the sterile supply closet, the only place without security cameras. She pulled the device from her belt and authenticated the download. The file opened on the small screen. Cosima zoomed in on the text. She read the risk assessment. She read the cold, sterile mathematics comparing the cost of human life to the yield of quarterly dividends. And then she stared at the dark blue ink of her father's signature. A profound, icy stillness washed over her. The bone-deep exhaustion that had plagued her for 26 hours vanished, replaced by a pure, terrifying clarity. Her father had not made a mistake. He had not been misled by a negligent subordinate. He had signed the death warrants of the children currently suffocating in her ward. And her brother was standing in a ballroom, raising a glass to the prophets. Cosima locked the screen. Saving Lily Caldwell and the other infants was no longer the sole objective. Keeping them breathing was just triage. To truly stop the bleeding, she could not just practice medicine. She had to dismantle the Apex empire piece by piece. She pushed the supply closet door open, stepping back into the harsh light of the ICU. She needed a weapon, and she needed a proxy. The rhythmic wheeze of the manual resuscitators filled the air, but her eyes locked onto Senator Caldwell, pacing anxiously beside his daughter's bed. He was desperate, powerful, and entirely unaware that the man he traded political favors with was the one holding the knife to his child's throat. Cosima walked straight toward him. She had 12 hours before Thorne fired her, and she intended to use every single minute to set a trap. I walked straight toward Senator Caldwell. He stood frozen near the shattered chaos of bed 2. His posture was rigid, his eyes locked on the team manually ventilating his daughter. The color had completely drained from his face. Her lungs are failing to oxygenate, I told him, keeping my voice level. The manual bagging is no longer sufficient. Her blood acidity is dropping into a critical zone. We need to bypass her respiratory system entirely to save her life. We have to place her on an extracorporeal oxygenation circuit. Caldwell tore his gaze away from his daughter and looked at me. Do whatever it takes, he said. Just save her. I turned to the scrub nurse. Prep operating room 4 immediately. A junior resident stepped forward, his eyes wide with panic. Dr. Thompson, which Apex circuit should I prime for the bypass? Neither of them, I replied. Go down to the sub-basement, find storage unit 7. There is a Century model analog bypass pump sitting under a canvas tarp. It has been collecting dust down there since 1998. Bring it up to the surgical suite right now. The residents stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. That machine is obsolete. It has no digital monitors. It lacks modern automated pressure sensors. It has no software, I countered, which means the manufacturer cannot force it to fail us tonight. Move. Down in the grand lobby of Atlanta General, the automatic glass doors slid open to admit the bitter winter chill. 3 men in custom wool suits strode across the terrazzo floor. They carried leather briefcases and wore the calculated, empty expressions of corporate fixers. The lead attorney for Apex Medical approached the security desk, flashing a silver identification badge. He demanded immediate access to the pediatric intensive care unit to conduct an emergency proprietary equipment audit. Maya Sterling stepped directly into his path. "You are out of your jurisdiction," Maya said. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried an unmistakable authority across the cavernous lobby. The lead fixer stopped. He offered a thin, patronizing smile. "Ms. Sterling, we have direct authorization from Hospital Director Thorne to reclaim defective hardware. It is a standard recall protocol to ensure patient safety." "Not tonight," Maya replied. "Under the Georgia Medical Emergency Preservation Statute, removing active life support hardware during an unresolved critical care event constitutes felony obstruction. If you step into that elevator, I will instruct hospital security to arrest you for attempted manslaughter." The attorney narrowed his eyes, stepping a fraction closer to intimidate her. "You are overstepping your role. Director Thorne will have your badge and your office cleared out by morning." "Tell Thorne to try," Maya said. She folded her arms, planting her heels firmly between the corporate suits and the elevator bank. She held the line, refusing to yield a single inch. Up in operating room 4, the harsh surgical lights beamed intense heat onto my shoulders. The room smelled of iodine and sterile cotton. The old Century bypass machine sat beside the surgical table. It was a heavy block of stainless steel, featuring mechanical cranks, analog pressure dials, and thick, transparent tubing. It looked like a museum relic. It was beautiful. I scrubbed in. My hands ached, the joints stiff and sore from hours of relentless manual resuscitation. The bone-deep fatigue felt like a heavy iron vest draped over my chest. I pushed the physical sensation away. I needed precision. I picked up the scalpel. The steel felt heavy in my cramped fingers. I made the initial incision at the right side of Lily Caldwell's neck, isolating the jugular vein and the carotid artery. The room was silent, except for the rhythmic hum of the analog motor warming up. I threaded the thick plastic cannulas into the vessels. The physical strain of the delicate maneuver caused my vision to waver. The heat radiating from the overhead lamps became oppressive. A single drop of sweat gathered near my hairline. It traveled down my temple, hung for a fraction of a second, and fell. It landed on the sterile blue paper drape just inches from the open incision. It left a tiny dark circle of moisture on the paper. In that exact second, the cardiac monitor shrieked. Ventricular fibrillation. Lily heart rhythm unraveled into a chaotic, lethal shudder. "She is coding," the anesthesiologist yelled. The analog pump required manual priming. It lacked the automated sensors of the modern Apex units to detect the pressure drop. I dropped my instruments and grabbed the heavy steel crank on the side of the Century machine. I used my raw, remaining physical strength to turn the dial. I forced her dark, deoxygenated blood out of her body, pushed it through the archaic oxygenator, and pumped the bright red return flow back into her carotid artery by hand. "Charge the paddles to 50 joules, I ordered. The scrub nurse handed me the internal defibrillator spoons. I placed the small metal paddles directly against the exposed cardiac tissue. "Clear," I said. The electrical shock jolted her small frame. I kept cranking the analog dial, maintaining the artificial blood flow. I stared at the monitor. The chaotic lines spiked, paused, and then settled into a steady, rhythmic pattern. Normal sinus rhythm. The crisis broke. The analog dials on the old machine spun with a steady mechanical click. It was a primitive sound, devoid of digital chimes or touchscreens. It was safe. Lily's skin gradually lost its terrifying pallor, regaining a flush of healthy pink. I stepped back, letting the perfusionist take over the manual dials. My breathing was ragged. I peeled off my surgical gown and threw it into the biohazard bin. The hardest part of the medical intervention was over. The political intervention was just beginning. I pushed through the heavy metal doors of the surgical suite and walked into the private waiting room. Senator Marcus Caldwell paced the length of the carpet, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, he ended the call and rushed forward. His eyes were bloodshot, his tailored suit wrinkled. The polished veneer of the powerful politician had burned away, leaving only a terrified father. "She is stable," I said, immediately cutting off his frantic questions. "We put her on an older extracorporeal oxygenation circuit. Her heart and lungs are resting. She will recover." Caldwell let out a long, shuddering breath. He sank into a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands. For a moment the room was silent, and he looked up. The profound relief in his eyes hardened into a sharp, focused anger. "Why did the machine fail?" he demanded. His voice was low and dangerous. "Atlanta General just spent $20 million upgrading that intensive care unit. You have the newest technology on the market. Why did my daughter almost die on a brand new ventilator?" I looked at the man sitting in front of me. Marcus Caldwell had the ear of the governor. He commanded the state attorney general. He had the power to initiate federal inquiries. He was the perfect weapon. "The machine did not just fail, Senator," I told him. "It was designed to fail, and the people who built it knew it would happen." He stood up, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you saying?" I reached into the pocket of my scrubs and pulled out my secure phone. I unlocked the screen and opened the encrypted file Maya had sent me from my father's private server. I tapped the screen, bringing up the Q4 supply chain variances report. I scrolled down past the manufacturing warnings, past the cost-benefit analysis equating dead children to profit margins, and stopped right on the scanned signature in dark blue ink. I held the phone out to the senator. "My father signed this document 6 months ago," I said, my voice empty of all emotion. "He authorized the shipment of defective respiratory valves to inflate his end-of-year corporate valuation. He put those machines in my ward. Your daughter almost died tonight because Richard Thompson wanted a bigger bonus." Caldwell stared at the glowing screen. His eyes scanned the cold, sterile mathematics of the internal audit. He read the warning. He saw the signature. I watched the realization dawn on his face. The grief over his daughter's near-fatal crisis evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, calculated political fury. He looked away from the screen and met my gaze. The dynamic between us shifted instantly. We were no longer doctor and frightened parent. We were two people who had just found a common enemy. "What do you need me to do?" Caldwell asked. Before I could answer him, the double doors of the waiting room swung open. My sister Vanessa marched into the room. Vanessa brought the sharp scent of imported winter pine and expensive perfume into the sterile waiting room. She wore a pristine white cashmere coat draped over her shoulders. The bright fabric looked absurd against the muted gray walls and the grim reality of the hospital. My younger sibling had never worked a single hour for a paycheck. She held the title of Vice President of Philanthropy at Apex Medical. It was a hollow position created entirely to provide her with a corner office, a corporate credit card, and an unearned sense of authority. She existed as my parents' perfect, compliant mirror. I stepped in front of Senator Caldwell, shielding his raw grief from her intrusion. The man had just watched his child cheat death, and he did not need to endure my family drama. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My tone lacked any familial warmth. Vanessa stopped a few feet away, her mouth set in a tight, impatient line. She looked at my messy hair and stained scrubs with blatant disgust. "You are ruining the holiday, Cosima," she said. "Mother is inconsolable. The photographer from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is arriving at the estate in 1 hour for the annual family portrait. You need to wash your face, change your clothes, and come home right now." I stared at her. The breathtaking disconnect from reality was staggering. Less than 50 feet away, a team of exhausted residents was manually pumping air into the lungs of suffocating infants. My hands still bore the faint metallic scent of Lily Caldwell blood. "I am working, Vanessa," I said. I kept my voice dangerously low to avoid drawing more attention. "I am keeping children alive. I am not leaving this ward for a photo opportunity." Vanessa scoffed. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder, a gesture she used whenever she felt denied. "Do not be so dramatic," she countered. "You have a dozen junior doctors who can handle the floor. You are choosing to be difficult. You always do this. You try to make us look bad by playing the martyr." She took a step closer, invading my space to emphasize her point. As she moved, the hem of her pristine white cashmere coat brushed against a biohazard hamper near the doorway. A discarded blood-stained scrub top hung over the plastic rim. The crimson smear transferred instantly onto the expensive white wool. Vanessa let out a sharp gasp. She recoiled as if she had been burned by acid. She swiped frantically at the stain, her spotless image fractured by the visceral reality of my environment. "Look what you made me do," she snapped. Her voice rose an octave, echoing off the tile walls. "This coat is bespoke. You are so selfish, Cosima. You isolate yourself in this bleak hospital and punish the rest of us for your choices. If you do not walk out of those doors with me right now, Father is going to take action." I did not move. My expression remained blank. "What kind of action?" "He is going to freeze the Apex Independent Medical Research Trust," Vanessa said. A smug, victorious smile spread across her face. She thought she was holding a loaded weapon. The trust fund was the financial engine behind my pediatric surgical trials. It paid for my laboratory equipment and funded my residence stipends. Without it, my life work would halt. She assumed the threat of financial ruin would force my compliance. I looked at my younger sister. I saw the fragile vanity holding her together. She held no real power. She was merely a messenger pigeon sent by a coward. "You do not even know how the trust operates, Vanessa," I told her. The words felt like ice. "The account is legally bound by a blind covenant I signed at 18. Father cannot freeze the capital without proving gross medical negligence in a court of law. He sent you here to throw empty threats because he is terrified to face me himself." Vanessa face flushed a deep, ugly shade of red. The smugness vanished, replaced by petulant anger. "You are a bitter, arrogant woman," she hissed. "You think you are better than us because you wear those cheap scrubs. Father will destroy your career. He is already talking to the hospital board. They are going to fire you." I noticed a movement out of the corner of my eye. A young man sitting in the corner of the waiting room held his smartphone up. The camera lens was pointed directly at us. He was recording the entire exchange. The glowing red indicator light stared back at me. My mother public relations firm had already seeded the narrative that I was suffering a mental breakdown. A video of me screaming at my sister in an intensive care waiting room would be the final piece of evidence they needed to justify my termination to the public. They would spin Vanessa as the concerned sibling trying to help a disturbed doctor. I refused to give them the ammunition. I did not raise my voice. I did not step toward her. "Security," I called out. My voice was clear and authoritative, cutting through the ambient noise of the ward. 2 hospital guards stationed near the elevators jogged over immediately. "This woman is trespassing in a restricted critical care zone," I told the guards. I kept my eyes locked on Vanessa. "She is disrupting medical operations and harassing hospital staff. Escort her out of the building. If she resists, call the Atlanta police and press charges." Vanessa jaw dropped. She looked at the guards in disbelief. "You cannot kick me out. I am a Thompson. We own this wing." "You own nothing," I said. "Remove her." The guards stepped forward, flanking my sister. One of them gestured toward the elevator bank. "Please come with us, ma'am," the guard said sternly. Vanessa looked from the guards to me. Her chest heaved with indignant rage. "You are going to lose everything, Cosima. Everything." She turned on her heel and marched toward the elevators, the guards trailing close behind. The bloody smear on her coat was the last thing I saw before the metal doors slid shut. The young man in the corner lowered his phone, his eyes wide. I knew the video would be on the internet within 10 minutes. The corporate fixers would ensure it went viral. The clock was accelerating. The false narrative was slipping further out of my control. Dr. Thompson. I turned around. Maya Sterling strode through the double doors. She wore a sharp black trench coat over her evening gown. Her expression was grave. She carried a heavy, reinforced leather briefcase, the kind used to transport sensitive legal discovery documents. "We need a secure room," Maya said. right now. I led her down the corridor, bypassing the crowded nursing stations and the chaotic triage bays. We entered the senior attending on-call room. It was a windowless, cramped space containing a narrow cot, a desk, and a computer terminal. I closed the door and threw the deadbolt lock, sealing us inside. Maya placed the briefcase on the small desk and unclasped the metal latches. She pulled out a thick stack of printed documents and 2 solid-state hard drives. "I got the files out of the estate," Maya said, catching her breath. "I mirrored the entire Q4 variance directory. I have the emails, the engineering reports, and the supply chain authorizations. I even found a chain of internal communications between your father and the regional distributors. They knew the composite plastic valves would warp under high oxygen pressure. They calculated the exact failure rate to the decimal." I touched the cold metal casing of the hard drive. "This is the physical proof." "Yes," Maya replied, "but it is also a trap." She pulled a specific document from the stack and handed it to me. It was a copy of the non-disclosure agreement I had signed the day I accepted the Medical Research Trust Fund. The legal language was dense, filled with strict financial penalties and arbitration clauses. "If you leak this data directly to the press," Maya explained, her legal mind working at terrifying speed, "your father will invoke this agreement. He will claim you stole proprietary corporate secrets to sabotage a competitor. He will tie you up in civil litigation for a decade. He will have your medical license suspended pending the investigation. You will never set foot in an operating room again." I looked at the non-disclosure agreement. The Thompson empire was built on ironclad contracts and endless legal resources. They could afford to drag a lawsuit out until I was bankrupt and forgotten. "We cannot leak it to the press," I agreed. "We have to go higher." I sat down at the cramped desk and woke the computer terminal. I opened an encrypted web browser. My fingers moved across the keyboard, typing in the specific web address for the Federal Department of Justice Corporate Whistleblower Portal. The web page loaded. It was a stark, unadorned interface featuring a single, blinking submission box. "If we upload the drives here," Maya said, watching the screen over my shoulder, "the federal government takes jurisdiction. The non-disclosure agreement becomes void under federal whistleblower protection laws. The FBI will open a criminal syndicate investigation." "But Cosima, you need to understand the reality of this choice." I kept my eyes on the blinking cursor. "Tell me." "Once you hit submit, there is no turning back," Maya warned. "This is not a civil fine. This is wire fraud, corporate manslaughter, and criminal conspiracy. The Department of Justice will dismantle Apex Medical. They will freeze every asset your family owns. Your father will go to federal prison. Your mother and sister will lose everything. The Thompson legacy will be erased." I thought about my sister standing in the waiting room complaining about a ruined photograph while children turned blue on my ward. I thought about my mother weeping for the cameras. I thought about the cold, calculated signature my father placed on a document that nearly killed a senator daughter. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the encrypted hard drive. I plugged it into the computer terminal. The system recognized the external drive. A prompt appeared on the screen asking for the file destination. I dragged the Q4 variance directory into the federal submission box. The screen changed. A warning dialog popped up. "You are about to submit evidence of a federal crime. False submissions carry severe penalties. Do you wish to proceed?" I stared at the screen. Clicking the mouse would guarantee a decade of brutal legal warfare. It would ignite a firestorm that would consume the city elite. I placed my hand over the mouse, my finger resting lightly on the left button. The silence in the on-call room was heavy, thick with the weight of the impending destruction. Cosima stared intently at the glowing computer monitor. The federal whistleblower portal awaited her final submission. Her index finger rested heavily against the plastic mouse button. A singular, decisive, physical click separated her current existence from total, irreversible annihilation. She pictured her father sitting comfortably inside his opulent, secure study, Richard possessed vast, ruthless armies of corporate attorneys. If she uploaded those classified electronic files directly, his aggressive legal team would intercept the digital footprint within mere hours. They would immediately weaponize the draconian binding non-disclosure agreement she foolishly signed at 18 years old. She vividly recalled the stern, prophetic warning she received many years ago from her observant sister-in-law. Chloe was a brilliant, fiercely independent African-American former district attorney who unfortunately married Julian long before the toxic family fortune corrupted his soul entirely. Chloe had purposely sat Cosima down in a secluded, shadow-drenched corner of the sprawling estate gardens during an extravagant summer gala. The sharp, uncompromising prosecutor warned the naive young medical student never to sign any legally binding document Richard offered without first securing aggressive independent counsel. Chloe understood the predatory, sociopathic nature of the imposing patriarch deeply. She knew the highly publicized philanthropic trust fund was merely a deceptive, gilded cage meticulously designed to ensure absolute, unquestioning loyalty from his offspring. Cosima had arrogantly ignored that vital, experienced advice. Now, the invisible, suffocating iron bars of that inescapable trap were closing tightly around her vulnerable throat. Maya placed a steadying, warm hand over Cosima's trembling wrist. The intelligent chief legal counsel shook her head slowly. The ambient humming of the desktop tower filled the cramped, windowless space. If you execute this data transfer right now, Richard will bury you inside civil court, Maya explained. Her voice remained remarkably calm, but carried an intense, terrifying urgency. He will quickly file an emergency injunction to successfully seal the stolen evidence under the convenient guise of protecting intellectual property. You will face immediate professional disbarment and federal prison time before the morning news broadcasts even air. The horrifying truth will vanish into an impenetrable legal vault forever. We absolutely cannot win a direct frontal assault against his infinite resources. We must instead wage a hidden strategic shadow war. Cosima slowly pulled her trembling hand away from the smooth desk surface. The sheer crushing gravity of their perilous situation settled deep into her aching, exhausted bones. She desperately needed an external, untouchable entity powerful enough to breach the corporate fortress without ever triggering the suffocating confidentiality clauses. She required a protected, politically immune proxy. "I know exactly who we need," the seasoned surgeon replied. She unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped cautiously out of the confined chamber. The intensive care unit remained a chaotic, desperate battlefield, populated by exhausted medical personnel and failing respiratory hardware. She navigated swiftly past the central charting station, moving purposefully toward the isolated pediatric bay. Senator Marcus Caldwell stood precisely where she had left him earlier. His expensive, tailored suit was hopelessly rumpled, his silk necktie discarded somewhere along the sterile, brightly lit hallway. He intently watched the rhythmic, artificial rise and fall of his daughter's fragile chest. Lily remained miraculously stabilized on the archaic analog bypass pump, but the physiological margin of safety was agonizingly thin. Cosima approached the powerful politician. She touched his broad shoulder lightly, pulling his hyper-focused attention away from the archaic, clicking machinery. "Senator, I need you to accompany me to a secure, private location," she instructed. Her tone conveyed absolute, unyielding medical authority. Marcus looked deeply confused, but instantly recognized the profound, serious gravity reflecting in her dark eyes. He nodded silently, obediently following her away from the bedside cardiac monitor. They walked quickly back to the secluded administrative room where Maya waited patiently. Cosima secured the metal deadbolt once more. The confined space felt substantially smaller with the towering, intimidating politician standing near the small desk. Maya handed her trusted ally the decrypted solid-state drive. "We discovered the true, horrifying root cause regarding the widespread respiratory equipment failure," Cosima stated flatly. She plugged the metallic electronic device into the terminal hub and opened the restricted supply chain dossier. She turned the flat monitor screen toward Marcus. The glaring white light sharply illuminated his exhausted, deeply lined features. He leaned forward, his thick brow furrowed in intense, silent concentration. Read the third paragraph of this internal engineering audit the physician directed. Marcus scanned the dense, heavily redacted text. His intelligent eyes meticulously tracked the sterile, calculating language formatting the manufacturing safety report. He absorbed the grim, sociopathic statistical projections detailing mathematically acceptable pediatric mortality rates. He saw the deliberate, calculated executive decision to utilize substandard, highly unstable composite plastic materials purely for massive financial gain. Finally, his horrified gaze locked onto the stark, undeniable blue ink comprising the final, fatal corporate authorization signature. Richard Thompson, the senator whispered. The 3 syllables tasted exactly like toxic venom on his dry tongue. The profound psychological transformation occurring within the seasoned politician was utterly terrifying to witness. The helpless, grieving father evaporated completely into the chilled, conditioned air. In his imposing place stood a ruthless, calculating legislative veteran who directly commanded the state attorney general and controlled massive municipal hospital budgets. The raw, desperate sorrow previously slumping his posture hardened into calculated, frigid, unstoppable wrath. He finally understood the profound, unforgivable betrayal. A billionaire campaign donor had willingly, knowingly sacrificed a beloved child just to secure a temporary artificial boost in quarterly profit margins. He knowingly authorized the widespread deployment of these lethal pediatric units across multiple regional hospitals, Maya added. She stepped precisely into his direct line of sight, ensuring he registered every single devastating word. But if Dr. Thompson exposes this encrypted data herself, her vindictive father will immediately activate a punitive, ironclad non-disclosure agreement. He will effectively silence her voice and permanently bury the impending criminal investigation indefinitely. We desperately need someone who operates entirely above arbitrary corporate arbitration rules and civil penalties. Marcus straightened his rigid spine. The tense atmosphere surrounding him seemed to literally crackle with dangerous kinetic energy. He picked the absolute wrong family to casually sacrifice the senator promised. His low voice lacked any trace of emotional, uncontrolled hysteria. It was a cold, absolute, unshakable vow of impending destruction. I will immediately convene an emergency closed-door legislative session of the State Health Committee before sunrise today. I will personally mandate the Attorney General to issue a comprehensive, unannounced subpoena seizing every digital server inside the Apex corporate headquarters. They cannot successfully hide behind flimsy trade secrets when the government officially launches a massive criminal homicide inquiry. Cosima felt a fleeting, momentary surge of triumphant relief wash over her tired mind. The brilliant political trap was now perfectly constructed. Marcus would eagerly act as their impenetrable vanguard shield, launching the devastating legal assault from a fortified, untouchable position of absolute governmental immunity. Richard would finally face a catastrophic, inescapable public reckoning that his expensive lawyers could never suppress. Before another victorious, hopeful word could be spoken between the unlikely conspirators, a shrill, multi-toned klaxon violently ruptured the quiet sanctuary. It was not the standard, familiar mechanical failure alert they had grown accustomed to hearing throughout the night. This specific, piercing sound was infinitely worse. It was the rapid response biological hazard warning system. Cosima violently ripped the heavy door open and sprinted frantically down the polished linoleum corridor. The overwhelming sensory overload of the bustling, panicked ward hit her instantly. The frantic, exhausting manual bagging protocols had successfully kept the premature infants breathing throughout the endless night, but the continuous, unfiltered exposure of open, highly vulnerable airways to the ambient hospital environment had inevitably invited a lethal, microscopic invader, A fast-moving, highly aggressive, secondary bacterial pneumonia infection was rapidly, mercilessly sweeping through the critically compromised pediatric patients. The manual resuscitators, lacking the sophisticated sterile filtration systems of proper mechanical ventilators, had inadvertently pushed airborne pathogens deep into their fragile pulmonary alveoli. "We have a massive, dangerous temperature spike on bed 3, the senior charge nurse screamed over the deafening alarms. Her round face was completely pale with sudden, unadulterated panic. Core heart rate is rapidly climbing past 200 beats per minute. Bed 5 is completely crashing, another junior resident yelled frantically from across the crowded, chaotic room. Systemic blood pressure is plummeting dangerously low. Our standard sepsis protocol is entirely failing to stabilize the rapid hemodynamic collapse." Cosima finally reached the chaotic, swirling epicenter of the intensive care unit. 3 tiny, fragile bodies were actively convulsing under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights. Their underdeveloped immune systems, already severely ravaged by the prolonged lack of adequate oxygenation, were rapidly surrendering to the aggressive, opportunistic pathogen. The brilliant strategic victory recently secured in the shadows meant absolutely nothing if she lost the desperate, bloody war currently unfolding on the floor. "Push heavy, broad-spectrum antibiotics intravenously immediately," the lead attending ordered fiercely. She quickly grabbed a fresh set of sterile nitrile gloves from the nearby metal supply cart. She dove straight back into the terrifying medical nightmare, entirely abandoning the abstract political battlefield to physically fight for the fragile human lives violently slipping through her capable fingers. The intense, desperate battle against the aggressive bacterial pneumonia demanded every ounce of concentration the exhausted medical team possessed. Cosima forcefully pushed a heavy dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics through the intravenous line of the most critical neonate, silently praying the fragile immune system could withstand the potent pharmacological assault. Just as the terrifyingly rapid tachycardia began to show fractional signs of stabilizing, the central telemetry station emitted a bizarre, unnatural digital screech. It was not a standard medical alarm indicating physiological distress. It sounded like the agonizing death rattle of collapsing software. Every single proprietary monitor situated inside the pediatric intensive care unit flared with a blinding, piercing white brilliance before instantaneously snapping to pitch black. The localized hospital area network crashed completely. The massive centralized data hubs responsible for continuously tracking fragile heart rates, delicate oxygen saturations, and critical blood pressures across the entire wing vanished into the void. This catastrophic failure was no random technological glitch. Recognizing a dangerous, unpredictable shift in the political winds following Senator Caldwell intervening Richard, ruthless corporate fixers had launched a massive, desperate remote operation. Acting on panicked executive orders, the aggressive technicians forcefully injected a corrupt, destructive software update into the municipal hospital infrastructure under the highly deceptive guise of a mandatory emergency firmware patch. Their singular malicious objective involved permanently wiping the incriminating glitch data from the localized hardware before the Attorney General could officially issue binding legal subpoenas. By executing this brutal, uncoordinated digital override, the remote fixers inadvertently severed the delicate, encrypted handshake existing between the life-sustaining apparatus and the primary hospital monitoring grid. Complete, suffocating digital darkness descended upon the ward. The main fluorescent lighting flickered violently, detecting the massive systemic fault, and immediately switched over to the localized generator reserves. The harsh, clinical white bulbs extinguished, instantly replaced by the eerie, blood-red glow of the emergency preservation lighting. Long, distorted, menacing shadows stretched aggressively across the polished linoleum floorboards, immediately transforming the familiar, sterile healing sanctuary into a claustrophobic, terrifying subterranean cavern. Cosima had been actively functioning on pure synthetic adrenaline for 36 continuous hours. Her physical body practically screamed for absolute rest, her overworked muscles burning fiercely with accumulated toxic lactic acid. But her resilient mind miraculously achieved a state of hypervigilant, crystalline clarity. The automated, sophisticated safety nets were entirely obliterated. If a compromised infant suddenly threw a lethal cardiac arrhythmia in the dark, no computer would sound a helpful warning chime. The dedicated staff would only realize the catastrophic failure when the tiny patient turned permanently cold. She stood firmly at the center of the crimson-lit bay and projected her voice with absolute, uncompromising authority. She mandated an immediate, highly coordinated manual observation protocol designed to comprehensively cover all 3 critical care floors. She rapidly assigned 2 junior doctors to every single occupied bed, demanding physical stethoscope auscultations and manual pulse checks every 60 seconds without fail. The terrified nurses sprinted frantically through the scarlet shadows, clutching analog watches and heavy paper charts, desperately documenting fluctuating physiological metrics entirely by hand. The tense atmosphere felt remarkably primitive, representing a stark, horrifying regression to 19th century medicine occurring deep inside a billion-dollar metropolitan medical facility. Amidst the swirling, coordinated chaos, her secure smartphone violently vibrated inside her deep scrub pocket. She pulled the communication device out, the bright screen illuminating her exhausted, hollowed features with a harsh, bluish tint. A continuous, relentless stream of encrypted text messages flooded the notification banner. They were all from Julian. Her charming, sociopathic brother possessed a unique, terrifying talent for weaponizing familial affection to maintain absolute control. He was the designated golden son, meticulously groomed by their domineering father from childhood to eventually inherit the massive pharmaceutical empire, remaining completely shielded from the gruesome, bloody realities of actual patient care. She vividly recalled how Julian frequently utilized those exact same manipulative tactics against his estranged wife. Chloe was a brilliant, fiercely independent African-American state prosecutor who possessed the profound intellectual foresight to recognize the toxic corruption festering deep within the Thompson empire. She had subsequently filed for a highly publicized, heavily contested separation long before the corporate rot could permanently infect her own sterling legal reputation. Now Julian was aiming that precise psychological artillery directly at his sister. The incoming digital missives rapidly alternated between cloying, desperate apologies and vicious, unhinged hostility. One message would desperately beg the exhausted physician to return immediately to the opulent Buckhead estate, promising they could quietly rectify this unfortunate public misunderstanding together as a united front. The very next notification would violently snap into pure venom, vehemently accusing the dedicated surgeon of maliciously spreading jealous, unfounded fabrications designed solely to deliberately sabotage his impending executive promotion. He swore he would personally guarantee she lost her prestigious medical license forever if she continued relentlessly attacking their generous father. Cosima stared blankly at the scrolling digital vitriol. Previously, such highly concentrated psychological abuse would have easily triggered a familiar, suffocating wave of heavy familial guilt. She would have inherently doubted her own sanity, wondering if she was indeed the destructive, ungrateful daughter her parents constantly claimed she was. But the absolute, bone-deep physical exhaustion currently ravaging her entire nervous system miraculously stripped away the final, lingering remnants of that toxic behavioral conditioning. The calculated emotional manipulation simply failed to penetrate her hardened psychological armor. She completely compartmentalized the vicious digital assault, sliding the vibrating device back into her pocket without typing a single word in response. Her hands remained perfectly, astonishingly steady as she reached down to gently adjust the stiff endotracheal tube belonging to the fragile infant currently fighting the aggressive bacterial pneumonia. She gently felt the tiny, rapid thumping of the child-fragile heart beneath her practiced, calloused fingertips. The profound, undeniable physical reality of that desperate, fighting heartbeat completely eradicated any lingering loyalty she supposedly held for the toxic Thompson bloodline. An icy, unshakable, permanent resolve finally crystallized deep within her chest. She was no longer a frightened, obedient daughter, desperately seeking impossible parental validation. She was a lethal, uncompromising, apex predator, actively hunting the corrupt executives who dared to endanger her vulnerable patients. The immediate, terrifying medical crisis slowly began to stabilize under the relentless, exhausting manual surveillance protocols. The heavy intravenous antibiotics finally began aggressively suppressing the secondary bacterial infection spreading through the compromised ward. The young children remained remarkably alive, their tiny chests rising and falling rhythmically under the watchful physical guidance of the highly dedicated medical staff. However, a terrifying new reality simultaneously crashed down upon the brilliant surgeon as she evaluated the silent, deactivated hardware surrounding the beds. The forced corporate software update had successfully executed its primary malicious directive during the brief network blackout. The remote technicians had completely wiped the internal memory banks belonging to every single proprietary ventilator situated on the critical floor. The physical, undeniable data explicitly proving the expensive hardware failed due to intentional manufacturing negligence was permanently erased from the local machines. The highly expensive equipment now appeared perfectly flawless, completely scrubbed of any incriminating digital fingerprints or error logs. The encrypted solid-state hard drive Maya had bravely extracted from the private executive estate remained their sole, solitary weapon against the massive billionaire syndicate. Cosima suddenly remembered exactly where she had left that invaluable, irreplaceable electronic device. It was still physically plugged into the desktop terminal, located inside the locked attending on-call room, sitting precariously on the absolute precipice of the federal whistleblower portal, waiting for her final confirmation click. She abruptly abandoned the stabilized medical bay, sprinting frantically down the scarlet-lit hospital corridor. The emergency preservation lighting cast terrifying, elongated shadows against the peeling institutional walls, matching the frantic pounding of her racing pulse. She finally reached the heavy wooden door and grasped the cold metallic handle. The solid internal deadbolt had been forcibly disengaged from the outside. The door swung open far too smoothly, revealing the cramped, windowless interior bathed in shadows. The small wooden desk sat completely empty. The municipal hospital computer terminal, the encrypted solid-state hard drive, and the thick stack of printed legal documents were entirely gone. Standing casually in the dark corner of the dim room, holding the confiscated electronic equipment securely under his tailored arm, was Director Eris Thorne. He offered a cold, practiced corporate smile, politely informing the devastated physician that hospital administration was actively seizing all localized network assets to thoroughly investigate the sudden, catastrophic security breach affecting the pediatric wing. The ultimate political trap had just violently snapped shut from the inside, leaving her completely unarmed in the dark. Director Eris Thorne vanished down the dimly lit corridor, carrying the confiscated electronic evidence that could have dismantled a corrupt pharmaceutical dynasty. Cosima stood completely frozen inside the cramped administrative room. The terrifying reality of her disarmed status settled heavily onto her exhausted shoulders. She possessed absolutely no physical proof remaining. The lethal software update had successfully scrubbed the localized hospital ventilators, and now administration held the singular encrypted hard drive. She slowly exited the confined space, navigating back toward the primary intensive care waiting area. The emergency generators hummed loudly, casting a relentless crimson hue across the polished floorboards. As she approached the designated family section, a flickering television monitor mounted high upon the wall caught her attention. The volume remained entirely muted, yet the scrolling news ticker at the bottom of the screen screamed a devastating narrative. A prominent national news anchor stared gravely into the camera. Directly beside his polished face floated a massive, high-resolution photograph of Cosima. It was an older image, taken during a prestigious medical gala, subtly manipulated to make her appear severely fatigued and deeply unstable. The glaring headline flashing below her portrait read, "Leading surgeon accused of extreme medical sabotage amidst bitter inheritance dispute." Richard did not simply wait to be cornered by political subpoenas. Her ruthless father possessed a long-documented history of aggressively preempting his adversaries. Decades ago, when a rival medical conglomerate attempted a hostile corporate takeover, Richard utilized his vast media connections to entirely fabricate a devastating scandal regarding their chief executive. He systematically destroyed the man's reputation before any legal filings ever materialized. He was currently deploying that exact same destructive playbook against his own daughter on Christmas Eve night. Cosima watched the silent broadcast detail horrific, baseless allegations. The news network claimed she intentionally manipulated respiratory hardware parameters, purposely endangering fragile pediatric patients, simply to frame Apex Medical. They painted her as a vindictive, deranged heiress, desperately seeking revenge after allegedly being written out of the billionaire family will. Her mother, Evelyn, had clearly provided exclusive statements to the eager journalists, painting a tragic portrait of a deeply disturbed child refusing psychiatric intervention. A few feet away from the glowing screen, a young woman sat hunched over a plastic chair. The mother was softly crying, her thin shoulders shaking with profound, agonizing terror. Her premature infant was currently fighting for breath inside the adjacent ward. The grieving parent glanced up briefly, meeting Cosima's gaze. The look shared between them lacked any former trust. It was replaced entirely by pure, unadulterated suspicion and gripping fear. The vicious public relations strike had successfully achieved its primary objective. It systematically alienated the dedicated physician from the very families she was desperately trying to save, plunging her into an isolated, suffocating abyss. Before the crushing weight of that total isolation could completely paralyze her, heavy footsteps rapidly approached from behind. Maya Sterling materialized from the crimson shadows. The brilliant chief legal counsel looked unusually disheveled, her expensive black trench coat wrinkled, but her sharp eyes burned with fierce, unyielding determination. "They are convening an emergency tribunal," Maya announced, her voice a tight, controlled whisper. "The hospital board of directors is absolutely panicking under the immense media scrutiny. The news networks are relentlessly demanding a formal statement. Eris Thorne just officially called for a midnight vote to secure your immediate termination and subsequent removal from the premises by armed security. We have less than 3 hours before you are physically escorted out of this building, effectively stripping you of all authority to protect those infants." Cosima felt a cold, hard knot form deep within her stomach. If they terminated her clinical privileges, Thorne would immediately replace her with a compliant, corporate-approved attending who would willingly ignore the lethal manufacturing defects. "We have nothing left to fight them with," the surgeon replied quietly. Thorne confiscated the encrypted drive. "The localized machines are completely wiped." Maya offered a grim, humorless smile. Her extensive background in vicious corporate litigation had thoroughly prepared her for sudden, catastrophic betrayals. She grew up watching her fiercely intelligent African-American aunt ruthlessly navigate the cutthroat legal landscape of downtown Atlanta. That formidable female relative had taught Maya early on that one must never rely solely upon a single weapon during a war. "I am a seasoned attorney," Cosima Maya stated firmly. "I never surrender my only piece of leverage without securing a secondary contingency plan first." The lawyer reached into her deep coat pocket and withdrew a folded stack of printed bank statements. She aggressively smoothed the crumpled papers out over a nearby nursing station counter. "While you were physically keeping those children alive, I utilized my administrative security clearance to deeply audit the personal financial accounts belonging to our esteemed hospital chairman," Maya explained rapidly. Eris Thorne did not confiscate our evidence simply to protect the hospital infrastructure. He acted out of pure, unadulterated greed. Look at these recent transaction ledgers. Cosima leaned over the illuminated counter, her exhausted eyes scanning the dense columns of numerical data. She identified a massive, highly suspicious wire transfer originating from a heavily obscured offshore holding company. The routing numbers matched a known shell corporation frequently utilized by Apex Medical for discrete, unrecorded executive bonuses. The massive financial deposit had landed precisely inside Thorne's private offshore account barely 48 hours ago. Richard bribed him. Cosima deduced a wave of sickening realization washing over her. He purchased the board chairman to initiate this exact termination vote. Maya confirmed. Your father knew the defective valves would inevitably fail during the winter respiratory surge. He proactively paid Thorne to guarantee that whoever raised the alarm would be immediately discredited and professionally destroyed. It is a brilliant, airtight conspiracy. The sheer scale of the calculated corruption was staggering. The billionaire patriarch had meticulously orchestrated every single variable, purchasing loyalties and destroying reputations with terrifying sociopathic precision. The trap was flawlessly designed to completely crush any opposition before it could ever reach a courtroom. We cannot simply hand these financial documents over to Senator Caldwell. Maya continued, her tone urgent. If we wait for the state attorney general to legally intervene, the board will vote, security will drag you outside, and Thorne will successfully destroy the remaining evidence. The political wheels turn far too slowly to save your career. Tonight, Cosima stared at the damning bank records. Her initial, overwhelming despair rapidly solidified into something incredibly sharp and dangerous. She thought about her sister Vanessa vainly complaining about a ruined cashmere coat while infants suffocated. She envisioned her brother Julian sending abusive digital threats to protect his unearned inheritance. She pictured her father sitting comfortably inside his fortified mansion, casually writing massive checks to bury his own daughter alongside his tiny victims. They wanted a bitter, dramatic spectacle. They desired a public execution to cleanly resolve their corporate liabilities. We are not going to wait for the authorities, the surgeon finally declared. Her voice resonated with absolute chilling certainty. If Eris Thorne wants to host a midnight tribunal to execute my medical career, we are going to personally attend that meeting. Maya raised an inquisitive eyebrow. You are not officially invited to the executive boardroom. Armed guards are actively stationed at the elevator banks precisely to prevent you from accessing the upper administration levels. Then we will find an alternative route, Cosima replied. I know this building better than any corrupt executive sitting on that board. I have spent the last decade navigating every hidden access tunnel, subterranean maintenance shaft, and forgotten service corridor to reach crashing patients. We will bypass the security barricades entirely. The plan was incredibly reckless, bordering on sheer, absolute madness. Attempting to forcefully infiltrate a restricted corporate meeting would instantly validate every single unhinged accusation currently broadcasting across the national news networks. If they failed to thoroughly convince the panicked directors, Cosima would face severe criminal trespassing charges alongside her impending medical malpractice lawsuits. Yet gazing at the determined lawyer standing beside her, the physician understood they possessed absolutely no other viable option. The defensive strategy had entirely collapsed. It was time to aggressively go on the offensive. Gather those documents, Cosima instructed. Her exhausted posture straightened, channeling a deep, hidden reserve of pure adrenaline. We are going to violently turn the tables. We will publicly expose Eris Thorne in front of his prestigious peers, utilizing his own dirty money to shatter his manufactured credibility. As the two women turned to execute their desperate infiltration, a sudden, unexpected sound echoed through the crimson-lit hallway. The heavy double doors leading toward the main surgical theater slowly pushed open. Senator Marcus Caldwell emerged from the shadows. His presence was highly unexpected, given their prior agreement to let him wage the political war from a safe distance. The powerful politician walked deliberately toward them. He did not look like a grieving father anymore. He resembled a seasoned general, preparing for total warfare. I just watched the television broadcast, Marcus stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Your father is attempting to manipulate the public narrative to protect his lethal investments. Cosima nodded slowly. He bribed the hospital chairman to fire me tonight. We are heading upstairs right now to crash the board meeting and expose the financial transaction. The senator absorbed this critical information without blinking. He adjusted the cuffs of his wrinkled dress shirt. His daughter was miraculously stable, resting safely on the archaic bypass machine. His immediate parental duty was fulfilled. Now, his profound wrath required a target. You are going to need a witness who possesses undeniable state-level authority to authenticate those bribery accusations, Marcus said smoothly. A disgraced surgeon and a rogue attorney bursting into a closed room will easily be dismissed as disgruntled employees. But if the chairman of the State Health Committee kicks the door down alongside you, those panicked directors will be forced to listen. The surprise offer completely altered the tactical landscape. With a prominent state senator physically backing their aggressive maneuver, the board could not simply order security to arrest them without triggering a massive, unprecedented governmental scandal. Are you absolutely certain, Senator Maya asked, her legal mind instantly calculating the immense risks. Your presence there will closely link your political career to this explosive confrontation. Marcus Caldwell offered a chilling, humorless smile that perfectly mirrored the aggressive determination burning within Cosima. My daughter is lying inside that ward because of their greed. My political career means absolutely nothing if I allow those monsters to walk away unpunished. Lead the way, Dr. Thompson. The unlikely trio marched away from the intensive care unit, plunging deep into the labyrinthine bowels of the massive medical facility. The digital clocks mounted upon the hospital walls silently ticked closer to midnight. The final explosive confrontation was rapidly approaching, promising to shatter the wealthy, corrupt foundations of the entire city. The subterranean maintenance shaft smelled of damp concrete and ancient industrial bleach. Cosima navigated the narrow passage with practiced efficiency, leading her small faction upward through the hidden architectural veins of the massive medical facility. Marcus Caldwell followed closely behind her. The powerful state senator had built his formidable political career as a ruthless district prosecutor, dismantling organized crime syndicates with calculating precision. He grew up navigating the harsh, unforgiving neighborhoods of southern Georgia, earning his influential position through sheer, brutal determination. Now that identical predatory focus was aimed directly at the corporate hierarchy, positioned several floors above their exhausted heads. Maya Sterling brought up the rear, clutching the explosive financial documents securely against her chest. The brilliant attorney had learned her aggressive litigation tactics from her formidable mentor, Chloe. As Cosima's sister-in-law, the highly respected African-American former prosecutor possessed intimate knowledge regarding the toxic Thompson family dynamics. Chloe had always warned Maya that incredibly wealthy, powerful men only respected the devastating language of absolute, undeniable leverage. Maya carried that vital lesson tightly tonight. The digital clock illuminated on the cellular device read exactly 2 a.m. Christmas morning had officially arrived, bringing neither peace nor salvation to the besieged hospital. They bypassed the heavily guarded central elevator banks completely. Emerging from a concealed service doorway originally designed for custodial staff, the trio stepped onto the luxurious, thickly carpeted expanse characterizing the executive administrative tier. The stark, jarring contrast between the desperate, blood-stained intensive care unit below and this opulent, insulated corporate sanctuary was physically nauseating. Intricate mahogany panels lined the quiet, sprawling hallway. Elaborate seasonal decorations featuring imported frosted pine garlands and sparkling ornaments hung mockingly from the expensive lighting fixtures. Cosima did not hesitate or slow her determined pace. She marched straight toward the imposing double doors securing the primary conference chamber and violently shoved them open. The heavy brass hinges groaned loudly, instantly shattering the hushed, anxious murmurs circulating inside the room. 12 prominent board directors sat rigidly positioned around a massive, polished table. Eris Thorne occupied the prominent seating arrangement at the head of the gathering. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit, his silver hair impeccably styled, looking every inch the wealthy, untouchable hospital director. Thorne had clawed his way out of a poverty-stricken childhood, transforming himself into a polished corporate shark over decades of ruthless maneuvering. He worshipped currency and status because he deeply understood the terrifying vulnerability of lacking such resources. The sudden, forceful intrusion sparked immediate, chaotic outrage among the assembled executives. A wealthy real estate developer sitting near the entrance jumped quickly to his feet, loudly demanding their immediate removal from the restricted floor. Thorne narrowed his cold, calculating eyes, his manicured hand drifting instinctively toward the sleek, silver telephone console resting near his leather portfolio. Marcus stepped fully into the bright overhead lighting, deliberately using his towering physical frame to block the only exit. The undeniable presence of the prominent legislative veteran immediately paralyzed the entire room. The enraged directors recognized the powerful politician instantly, their indignant shouting dying rapidly inside their dry throats. They understood that a ranking government official crashing a closed-door meeting signaled a catastrophic shift in their institutional security. Cosima moved forward her stained, messy scrubs, radiating the visceral, horrifying reality of the medical war unfolding downstairs. She completely refused to utilize any soft, emotional appeals. She did not bother describing the terrifying sight of suffocating children or the agonizing tears shed by terrified parents. These highly insulated corporate figures only respected cold, hard currency and strict liability metrics. Therefore, she delivered the pure, undeniable mathematics detailing her father's catastrophic fraud. She rapidly outlined the exact tensile strength variations concerning the defective composite respiratory valves. She accurately recited the proprietary engineering algorithms Apex Medical utilized to intentionally obscure the mechanical degradation process from standard safety inspectors. The dedicated surgeon explained exactly how the compromised ventilation hardware systematically failed when exposed to continuous high-pressure oxygen saturation therapies. Finally, she provided the precise, calculated mortality projections Richard Thompson had willingly accepted as reasonable collateral damage simply to secure his massive, unprecedented quarterly performance bonuses. Eris attempted to forcefully interject his smooth voice dripping with condescending authority. He insisted these were highly complex technical allegations requiring extensive, prolonged investigation before any drastic personnel decisions could be rendered. He smoothly proposed establishing a comprehensive month-long internal review committee. It was a classic, transparent corporate filibuster designed entirely to bury the immediate crisis under endless bureaucratic paperwork until the public relations storm safely passed. Maya stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood border surrounding the carpet. She lifted the thick, heavily reinforced legal binder she carried and slammed it violently down upon the exact center of the mahogany table. The thunderous, heavy thud echoed like a physical gunshot, causing several wealthy board members to flinch backward in their plush leather chairs. The brilliant attorney ruthlessly dismantled the proposed delay tactic. She stared directly at the director, her expression completely devoid of mercy or hesitation. She expertly detailed the massive hidden offshore wire transfer recently executed by Apex Medical. Maya explicitly named the secretive holding company involved and recited the exact routing numbers corresponding to the illicit bribe, deposited directly into the personal financial accounts belonging to the chairman. Thorne's face completely drained of all color. His arrogant, carefully composed facade shattered instantly into a mask of pure terror. Maya did not stop the verbal assault there. She casually informed the terrified executive that she had already electronically forwarded the comprehensive transaction ledgers to the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division, precisely 10 minutes prior. The uncompromising federal financial regulators were actively building the massive criminal indictments as they spoke. Total, suffocating silence descended heavily upon the grand boardroom. The other directors stared at their leader with mounting, unadulterated horror, suddenly realizing their esteemed chairman had secretly tethered their entire prestigious medical institution to a massive, rapidly sinking criminal conspiracy. Their pristine professional reputations were currently tied to a sinking, toxic anchor. Suddenly, Thorne grabbed the silver telephone console. His trembling fingers hastily punched the rapid dial code connecting directly to the central security hub located on the ground floor. For one terrifying, suspended second, Cosima genuinely believed the cornered, desperate animal was choosing mutually assured destruction. She logically assumed he was dispatching armed guards to forcefully remove them from the premises, while simultaneously ordering the physical destruction of the pediatric ward below. The line connected. Thorne spoke with frantic, desperate urgency into the receiver. He commanded the tactical response team to deploy all available personnel immediately toward the pediatric intensive care unit. However, the subsequent directive unexpectedly shifted the entire tactical paradigm. He did not order an evacuation or a systemic network purge. He explicitly instructed the armed guards to form an impenetrable physical barricade surrounding the entire medical floor. Nobody enters that ward, and absolutely nobody leaves without my direct, explicit, verbal authorization, Thorne barked loudly into the receiver. Secure every single piece of proprietary hardware. Protect the physical evidence at all costs. The corrupt chairman severed the connection and slowly sank back down into his expensive leather chair. He was a highly pragmatic, calculating creature above all else. Confronted with undeniable federal financial exposure and the intimidating physical presence of an enraged state senator, Thorne recognized that protecting Richard Thompson was a completely lost cause. The billionaire patriarch actions were entirely indefensible, and the impending fallout would easily destroy anyone standing nearby. To successfully survive the impending legal apocalypse and secure invaluable federal immunity for himself, the hospital director was officially crossing over to join the rebellion. He looked around the silent, stunned room, his survival instincts entirely overriding his previous illicit loyalties. Thorne formally called for an immediate, binding administrative vote to officially invoke the comprehensive federal whistleblower protection clause for Dr. Cosima Thompson. The terrified board members, desperately eager to distance themselves from the radioactive bribery scandal, raised their trembling hands in rapid, unanimous agreement. The massive administrative victory felt incredibly surreal. Cosima now possessed the necessary institutional armor to finally expose her father completely, without losing her precious medical license. But just as Maya began drafting the emergency protective injunctions on her portable device, the heavy mahogany doors swung violently open once again. A breathless, terrified junior nurse stood framed in the corridor. The young woman looked directly at the victorious surgeon, her eyes wide with fresh, absolute panic. The internal corporate boardroom war was momentarily won, but Julian had just arrived at the main hospital entrance, flanked by heavily armed private corporate mercenaries, demanding the immediate physical extraction of all Apex machines. The terrified junior nurse gasped for air while standing inside the grand mahogany threshold. She rapidly explained that heavily armed private corporate contractors were currently swarming the primary hospital lobby. Julian Thompson had bypassed the standard security checkpoints entirely. He was leading a ruthless team of aggressive mercenaries directly toward the upper administrative levels. The Golden Sun was no longer utilizing manipulative digital text messages to wage his psychological war. He had resorted to sheer physical violence to forcefully confiscate the incriminating proprietary hardware and the stolen encrypted data. Marcus Caldwell instantly pulled his cellular device from his tailored suit pocket. The state senator tapped a secure sequence onto the glowing screen. He calmly informed the dedicated surgeon that federal bureau agents were currently mobilized and waiting in the surrounding city blocks. However, those elite government investigators desperately required absolute physical possession of the solid-state hard drive Maya Sterling currently held. The federal magistrate absolutely refused to authorize the imminent dawn raid upon the sprawling Thompson estate without receiving that tangible electronic evidence first. A terrifying, incredibly narrow window of opportunity suddenly materialized before them. They faced a rapidly ticking clock. If Julian successfully seized that digital storage unit, the entire criminal case would evaporate instantaneously into thin air. Maya tightly gripped the metallic device inside her heavy wool coat pocket. The brilliant legal counsel exchanged a deeply serious glance with Cosima. They implicitly understood the immense tactical advantage they held regarding the complex architectural layout characterizing the massive medical facility. The Golden Heir had spent his entire privileged existence navigating pristine corporate boardrooms and luxurious country clubs. Richard had meticulously shielded his designated successor from any genuine hardship or complicated logistical struggles. Chloe, the highly observant African-American former wife belonging to Julian, had frequently noted this exact fundamental weakness during their disastrous marriage. The seasoned prosecutor recognized that whenever money completely failed to instantly resolve a complicated problem, her arrogant husband inevitably panicked and resorted to deploying blunt, uncoordinated force. He possessed absolutely no strategic finesse. He was essentially a wealthy tourist attempting to violently conquer a subterranean labyrinth he barely comprehended. Cosima instructed the seasoned attorney to immediately head downward, utilizing the secondary custodial shafts. Maya needed to rapidly reach the subterranean loading docks where the federal contacts waited silently in unmarked vehicles. Meanwhile, the dedicated physician would actively draw the aggressive pursuit toward a completely different location. She intended to utilize herself as human bait to protect the crucial transfer. The two women sprinted away from the panicked corporate directors still sitting frozen inside the boardroom. They seamlessly separated at the primary corridor intersection. Cosima deliberately kicked a heavy metal trash receptacle, sending it crashing loudly across the polished floorboards. The deafening metallic clatter echoed violently down the cavernous hallway. She instantly heard the heavy rhythmic thudding of tactical combat boots ascending the central concrete stairwell. The violent pursuers possessed immense physical strength, but completely lacked vital environmental awareness. She darted rapidly into the eastern corridor. The emergency preservation lighting bathed the empty expanse in a harsh, suffocating crimson hue. This specific section led directly toward the decommissioned psychiatric wing. The hospital administration had formally abandoned this expansive area nearly 7 years prior due to massive funding deficits. The heavy steel doors separating the functional wards from this forgotten territory were notoriously difficult to navigate. The physician ran fiercely, her tired lungs burning desperately for oxygen. The heavy footsteps thundered closely behind her, accompanied by angry, echoing shouts commanding the mercenaries to fan out across the adjacent administrative rooms. Cosima deliberately slowed her frantic pace, allowing her dark silhouette to briefly manifest under a flickering red bulb. She wanted her vicious brother to visually confirm his primary target. A massive contractor shouted a gruff confirmation, accelerating his heavy pursuit. Cosima quickly slipped through a narrow, concealed maintenance alcove originally designed to house massive industrial ventilation pipes. She pressed her exhausted body completely flat against the cold, damp concrete wall. The aggressive tactical team surged past her hidden position, blindly following the main arterial hallway leading directly into the dead-end psychiatric sector. She waited until the final mercenary crossed the damaged threshold before quietly stepping out from the shadows. She grasped the heavy, rusted iron locking mechanism securing the thick security door. With a sudden, violent exertion of remaining physical strength, she forcefully dragged the massive barrier shut. The solid steel frame slammed into place with a terrifying, absolute finality. She rapidly engaged the exterior deadbolt, permanently trapping her vicious brother and his expensive tactical team inside the pitch-black abandoned wing. The heavy metal instantly muffled their furious shouts and violent pounding. She leaned heavily against the cold steel surface, desperately gasping for breath, while the adrenaline slowly began draining from her trembling muscles. Her cellular device suddenly vibrated softly against her hip. She retrieved the phone with shaking fingers. The illuminated screen displayed a highly anticipated notification from Senator Caldwell. The message contained exactly 2 words, confirming their ultimate victory. Warrants signed. The federal magistrate had finally received the physical evidence. Maya had successfully completed the dangerous subterranean handoff deep within the freezing concrete loading docks. The heavily armed government agents were currently breaching the iron gates surrounding the opulent Thompson estate. The intricate, toxic empire Richard had spent decades ruthlessly building upon the fragile bodies of innocent children was finally collapsing under the absolute weight of federal law. Cosima slid slowly down the heavy door, her tired legs completely surrendering to the profound, bone-deep exhaustion currently ravaging her nervous system. The first pale gray hints of Christmas morning sunlight began filtering weakly through the small frosted window located near the ceiling. The terrifying physical chase was officially concluded. She had miraculously saved her fragile pediatric patients, permanently secured the criminal evidence, and successfully dismantled her sociopathic father's massive pharmaceutical legacy. A profound, unfamiliar sense of total peace slowly began settling over her weary soul. Then her phone vibrated a second time. It was an incoming voice transmission originating from a highly restricted, heavily encrypted satellite number. She stared blankly at the glowing digits, a chilling sensation creeping slowly up her spine. Richard possessed exactly 0 remaining allies at this hour. His expensive lawyers were currently scrambling desperately to secure their own immunity deals before the markets opened. He should be sitting, entirely trapped inside his luxurious mansion, surrounded by federal tactical units. She slowly pressed the acceptance icon and brought the device toward her ear. She fully expected to hear her father launching into a final, unhinged tirade of desperate threats and venomous curses. Instead, the voice echoing softly through the tiny speaker belonged exclusively to her mother. Evelyn Thompson sounded completely calm, her tone utterly devoid of the frantic, tragic hysteria she had displayed on the national news broadcasts merely hours ago. She did not sound like a grieving, confused matriarch trapped within a crumbling corporate dynasty. She sounded exactly like a brilliant, calculating apex predator who had successfully orchestrated a flawless, devastating financial coup. Cosima listened in absolute stunned silence as her mother casually explained the horrifying new reality. Evelyn had secretly transferred the vast majority of the liquid corporate assets into heavily guarded, untraceable overseas shell accounts weeks before the federal investigation ever officially began. She had deliberately allowed Richard to absorb the entire public relations disaster quietly, feeding his massive ego, while simultaneously preparing his total destruction. The matriarch had intentionally alerted the aggressive news networks tonight, creating the perfect, chaotic smokescreen required to execute her final, massive financial extraction, while everyone looked the other way. "Your father is currently being placed in federal handcuffs," Evelyn stated smoothly over the secure digital connection. "Julian is locked inside an abandoned hospital wing, facing imminent felony trespassing charges. The entire toxic legacy they proudly built is now reduced to worthless ashes. I am sitting comfortably aboard a private jet heading toward a jurisdiction lacking any extradition treaties with the United States government. You finally received the pure justice you so desperately craved, my brilliant daughter. And I safely acquired the massive fortune I patiently tolerated that arrogant man for 30 agonizing years to legally inherit." The line went completely dead. Cosima stared blankly at the dark screen, her blood running instantly frigid beneath her skin. She had spent the entire exhausting night waging a desperate, bloody war against the absolutely wrong monster. Richard was merely the arrogant, highly visible king positioned upon the chessboard, while Evelyn had been the silent, lethal queen, quietly controlling the entire catastrophic game from the shadows. Now, the incredibly wealthy, untouchable matriarch was completely free, possessing billions of dollars in stolen capital, leaving Cosima to manage the devastating radioactive corporate fallout completely alone. A terrifying new chapter was violently tearing itself open, just as the dawn arrived, proving the ultimate betrayal had always lived quietly inside her own childhood home. Pale winter sunlight fractured the heavy gray horizon covering metropolitan Atlanta. The freezing dawn brought a rare, delicate snowfall to the southern landscape. Tiny crystalline flakes drifted downward from the overcast sky, blanketing the chaotic urban sprawl in an illusion of pristine, undisturbed tranquility. This serene atmospheric display contrasted sharply with the aggressive, highly coordinated legal warfare currently mobilizing across the awakening city. Deep inside a secure communications hub located downtown, Senator Marcus Caldwell orchestrated the ultimate destruction of the Thompson dynasty. The seasoned politician stood tall, surveying the digital mapping displays, projecting various tactical routes toward the opulent Buckhead estate. Marcus had crawled his way upward from devastating rural poverty, forging an unbreakable political career by prosecuting wealthy criminals who believed their immense capital placed them above standard legal consequences. He possessed a profound predatory patience. Now, that exact relentless focus guided the Joint Task Force, comprised of elite federal agents and state investigators. The state attorney general had officially validated the encrypted data packet Maya Sterling successfully delivered during the chaotic night. Federal warrants bearing fresh judicial ink authorized an unprecedented raid upon the billionaire patriarch. A convoy of black, armored utility vehicles idled silently outside the federal building. Exhaust plumes plumed into the frigid morning air like dragon breath. Heavily armed operatives sat inside the insulated cabins, checking their tactical gear with practiced mechanical efficiency. A single, perfectly formed snowflake landed gently upon the reinforced windshield of the lead transport vehicle. The delicate ice crystal lingered for a fleeting second before melting into a solitary drop of water against the heated glass. It emphasized the chilling, absolute calm preceding a catastrophic, violent storm. The commanding officer issued a crisp radio directive. The heavy tires gripped the asphalt, propelling the dark fleet northward toward the sprawling, heavily fortified mansion where Richard currently resided in ignorant isolation. Simultaneously, a distinctly different confrontation unfolded beneath the towering glass ceiling crowning the primary medical atrium. Julian Thompson furiously paced the polished marble flooring. The designated golden heir possessed a terrifying realization that his expensive private mercenaries had completely vanished into the hospital depths. His frantic radio transmissions yielded only suffocating static. Cowardice inherently prevented the arrogant executive from personally ascending the stairwells to locate his trapped tactical squad. Instead, Julian pivoted toward the main intensive care elevator banks. He foolishly intended to corner Cosima directly, utilizing sheer physical intimidation to force her into issuing a public retraction, desperately hoping to mitigate the rapidly expanding public relations disaster. He was a man constructed entirely from unearned privilege and carefully curated corporate shielding. Richard had meticulously groomed his son for executive leadership while completely sheltering him from the brutal consequences of actual failure. Julian simply assumed he could always purchase or threaten his way out of any complicated predicament. However, his aggressive march abruptly halted. Maya Sterling stood resolutely blocking the brushed steel elevator doors. The brilliant legal counsel looked remarkably composed despite the grueling, sleepless night she had just endured. She wore her rumpled black trench coat like a suit of armor. Maya carried the formidable legacy of her Aunt Chloe, an exceptional African-American former state prosecutor who had famously humiliated Julian during a highly publicized, deeply bitter divorce proceeding several years prior. Chloe had taught her niece how to systematically dismantle arrogant men, utilizing nothing but cold, undeniable facts. Maya channeled that exact same lethal energy now. "Move aside," Julian commanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and mounting panic. "I need to speak with my sister right now. She has completely lost her mind and is actively destroying our family." Maya did not flinch. She observed the desperate executive with an expression of pure, unadulterated, clinical detachment. "You are not going anywhere near those fragile pediatric wards," she stated smoothly. "Your access privileges were permanently revoked by the hospital board exactly 40 minutes ago. Furthermore, Cosima is currently unavailable. She is busy keeping innocent children alive, despite your best efforts to suffocate them." The executive scoffed loudly, attempting to project a hollow aura of untouchable authority. "You hold absolutely no power here, Maya. My father owns this entire building. I will have you disbarred and thrown into federal prison for corporate espionage by tomorrow afternoon." The lawyer offered a small, razor-sharp smile that failed to reach her exhausted eyes. She slowly unbuttoned her deep coat pocket and retrieved a thin manila envelope. She extracted a single sheet of crisp white paper and held it forward. Julian snatched the document aggressively. His bloodshot eyes scanned the printed text. It was a highly confidential internal safety authorization regarding the defective composite respiratory valves. However, the most damning detail rested firmly at the bottom of the page. His own distinct flowing cursive signature occupied the final approval line, officially greenlighting the lethal hardware for immediate pediatric distribution. "This is an absolute forgery," Julian sputtered, his complexion rapidly draining of all healthy color. "I never personally signed off on those specific engineering metrics. My father handled the manufacturing oversight." Maya tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing right through his crumbling facade. "We both know Richard never signs anything carrying actual legal liability. He deliberately delegates the dangerous paperwork to ignorant subordinates. You were so incredibly desperate to prove your worthiness to your father that you blindly signed a stack of unread safety forms during the third fiscal quarter. You authorized the exact mechanical tolerances that are currently failing upstairs." The Golden Sun stared at the undeniable ink. The horrifying gravity of his profound negligence finally pierced his insulated reality. He was not merely a wealthy bystander witnessing a corporate scandal. He was a directly implicated participant holding maximum criminal exposure. "The federal agents possess the original documents right now," Maya continued, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. "The state attorney general is aggressively drafting multiple felony indictments for reckless endangerment, criminal negligence, and extensive consumer fraud. You are looking at a minimum of 20 years inside a maximum security penitentiary, Julian." He stumbled backward, the crisp paper slipping from his trembling fingers to flutter onto the cold marble floor. The immense, seemingly invincible pharmaceutical empire he was promised since birth was rapidly disintegrating into toxic ash. "You need to understand your current terrifying reality," the brilliant attorney advised coldly. "Your father will absolutely not protect you. When the federal investigators inevitably kick down his front door this morning, Richard will immediately present these exact same signed documents to the prosecution. He will legally claim his rogue, incompetent son authorized the defective components without his executive knowledge. He will ruthlessly sacrifice you to secure his own judicial immunity." Julian opened his mouth to argue, but no sound emerged. The absolute suffocating truth of her statement paralyzed his vocal cords. He knew his ruthless father possessed exactly zero genuine parental loyalty. Richard viewed his children strictly as expendable corporate assets. "I strongly suggest you secure separate, independent defense counsel immediately." Maya instructed delivering the final, devastating psychological blow, and you should probably call your lawyers from a secure location, because the authorities are already moving. You are going down, Julian, and you are going down completely alone. The arrogant heir stood frozen inside the grand hospital atrium, utterly shattered by the undeniable revelation of his impending doom. The terrifying realization that his entire existence was a carefully constructed, disposable lie finally broke him. He slowly turned away from the elevators, aimlessly wandering toward the glass exit doors like a hollow, defeated ghost. Maya watched him retreat, feeling a profound sense of vindication for the years of emotional abuse he had inflicted upon her family. Miles away from the medical facility, the heavily armed federal convoy finally reached the luxurious, secluded neighborhood containing the Thompson estate. The dark utility vehicles rolled silently down the snow-dusted residential avenue. They approached the massive, towering wrought iron gates securing the billionaire property. The private security guards stationed inside the fortified gatehouse took one terrified look at the endless line of flashing red and blue tactical lights reflecting against the fresh snow. Recognizing the absolute futility of resistance, the guards immediately raised the heavy metallic barriers. The federal vehicles pulled smoothly past the elaborate entrance, their tires crushing the pristine winter snow beneath immense treads. The tactical teams prepared to breach the grand mahogany front doors, fully expecting to confront a desperate, cornered corporate kingpin. However, a sudden frantic radio broadcast from the lead surveillance van immediately shattered the rigid operational silence. The thermal imaging sensors aimed directly at the sprawling mansion were returning a completely impossible, highly disturbing read. The palatial estate was entirely devoid of any human heat signatures. The imposing structure was completely dark, hollow, and absolutely empty. A new, terrifying mystery instantly engulfed the task force, indicating that the true mastermind had already executed a flawless, devastating escape. The sprawling Buckhead property felt unnervingly quiet, despite the festive holiday morning. Inside the massive central atrium, a towering coniferous tree stood, adorned with thousands of imported glass ornaments and shimmering silver ribbons. The heavily insulated copper roofing covering the central parlor effectively shielded the interior from exterior thermal imaging scans. This specific architectural feature inadvertently created the false negative reading that temporarily confused the federal task force, waiting outside the perimeter walls merely moments ago. Evelyn Thompson sat comfortably upon a plush velvet sofa. Her earlier phone call to Cosima, claiming she was currently flying aboard a private jet, had been a calculated, vicious lie, designed exclusively to inflict maximum psychological damage. In reality, the sudden freezing winter weather system had grounded all civilian aviation traffic across the metropolitan region. Forced to remain grounded, the matriarch returned to the family residence to maintain her wealthy, unbothered facade. She sipped vintage champagne from a delicate crystal flute, projecting absolute indifference regarding her collapsing criminal empire. Evelyn had spent 3 decades mastering the dangerous art of emotional detachment, viewing her own offspring merely as strategic pawns upon a vast corporate chessboard. She possessed a terrifying ability to completely compartmentalize human suffering, prioritizing financial growth above fundamental morality. Across the expansive room, Richard occupied his favorite leather armchair. He wore a tailored silk robe projecting the image of an untouchable, aristocratic king relaxing on Christmas Day. The billionaire patriarch had spent his entire adult life aggressively bending the universe to match his personal desires. Growing up in a fiercely competitive environment, he learned early that absolute control required punishing any form of disobedience severely. He firmly believed his preemptive public relations strike the previous evening had successfully destroyed his rebellious daughter. He felt completely invincible, insulated by his massive wealth and expansive political connections. His arrogance blinded him to the rapidly approaching catastrophe. Vanessa rested upon a large Persian rug near the crackling marble fireplace. The youngest sibling possessed a documented history of profound superficiality. She spent her formative years treating the hospital administration staff like personal servants, utilizing her powerful surname to secure endless unearned privileges. Currently, she aggressively tore the metallic wrapping paper off a small, incredibly expensive velvet box containing a diamond tennis bracelet. Her absolute ignorance regarding the lethal crisis unfolding downtown was staggering. She only cared about her immediate material satisfaction. "This holiday is completely ruined," Vanessa complained loudly. Her voice carried a shrill, petulant tone. "Cosima always manages to make everything about her personal drama. I cannot believe we have to deal with these absurd media stories instead of enjoying our traditional vacation to the Alps. My friends are relentlessly sending me text messages asking invasive questions about our family business. Evelyn completely ignored her younger child. The matriarch held a glowing cellular device against her ear, speaking animatedly with a prominent local socialite. Her disgusting, selfish behavior is absolutely devastating to our entire family. Evelyn declared smoothly into the receiver. We offered Cosima unlimited psychiatric support for her growing delusions, but she violently rejected our assistance. She fabricated this insane medical conspiracy merely because Richard slightly reduced her trust fund allocations last month. It is a classic, pathetic tantrum designed to embarrass us during the most important social season of the year. We are simply exhausted by her constant need for dramatic attention. Richard offered a tight, approving smile. He lifted his heavy crystal scotch glass, gently swirling the amber liquid over a single spherical ice cube. He deeply appreciated his wife maintaining their aggressive social narrative. The billionaire firmly believed that repeating a fabricated story often enough eventually transformed the lie into accepted reality. He took a slow, satisfying sip of his premium liquor, savoring the burning sensation sliding down his throat. Suddenly, the sharp, shrill ringing of the primary residence landline pierced the quiet atmosphere. The archaic telephone sat upon a polished mahogany side table. Very few individuals possessed that specific, unlisted number. Richard casually extended his arm, anticipating a deeply satisfying conversation. He confidently assumed the caller was Eris Thorne, finally delivering the official confirmation regarding the immediate termination of the rogue surgeon. The patriarch fully expected a groveling apology from the hospital director regarding the messy public spectacle, followed by absolute assurances that the defective respiratory equipment remained totally secured from outside investigators. Richard lifted the heavy receiver and pressed it against his ear. A smug, triumphant expression illuminated his aged features. "Merry Christmas, Eris," Richard greeted confidently. "I assume you are calling to confirm the trash has finally been permanently removed from our facility?" A prolonged, heavy silence stretched across the digital connection. When the hospital director finally spoke, his voice lacked any trace of its usual subservient warmth. Instead, the tone was shockingly cold, purely clinical, and undeniably hostile. "There is no trash being removed today," Richard Thorne stated flatly. The billionaire frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together in sudden confusion. He shifted his weight within the leather chair. "What exactly are you talking about? Did the board execute the termination vote or not?" "We certainly held a vote," the director replied smoothly. "However, the outcome was slightly different than you anticipated. The executive board formally recognized your daughter as a protected asset. The hospital administration has officially seized every single piece of proprietary Apex hardware currently located on our premises. Furthermore, we formally severed all existing financial contracts with your manufacturing corporation, effective immediately. Cosima is currently acting under full federal whistleblower protection." The smug expression instantly vanished from the patriarch's face. The blood violently drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a sickly pale gray complexion. A sudden, involuntary tremor struck his right hand. The heavy crystal scotch glass vibrated aggressively against the plastic telephone receiver, producing a sharp, rhythmic clinking sound that echoed loudly throughout the silent parlor. "You cannot do this," Richard whispered hoarsely. "I own that entire medical facility. I own you." "You own absolutely nothing," Eris corrected ruthlessly. "You are a massive, toxic liability. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission possesses comprehensive digital records detailing the illicit offshore bribes you deposited into my accounts. Your brilliant, unyielding daughter completely outmaneuvered your entire corrupt syndicate." Evelyn noticed the terrifying physical transformation completely consuming her husband. She ended her socialite call abruptly, tossing the cellular device onto the velvet sofa cushions. "What is wrong?" Evelyn demanded sharply. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the edge of the champagne flute. "Who is on the phone? Why are you shaking like a frightened child?" Richard could not vocalize a response. His throat felt completely paralyzed. The immense, terrifying reality of his catastrophic defeat crashed down upon his shoulders like a collapsing concrete vault. The unassailable kingdom he spent decades violently assembling was disintegrating into dust before his very eyes. Every single lie he told to construct his magnificent empire was suddenly dissolving. Thorne continued his verbal execution without offering a single ounce of mercy. He had survived the cutthroat corporate realm by quickly identifying sinking ships and ruthlessly abandoning them. Cosima spent the last 36 agonizing hours physically saving the innocent children you actively tried to kill for a slight percentage increase in your quarterly profit margins, the director explained. His voice dripped with pure, unfiltered disgust. She bypassed your lethal software updates. She physically ventilated the infants. She successfully delivered your encrypted manufacturing algorithms directly to the state attorney general. Your reign is entirely finished. I will destroy you, Richard finally managed to croak. His vocal cords strained under the immense pressure of his boiling, impotent rage. I will hire the most vicious legal defense team on the planet, and I will drag your pristine reputation through the deepest mud imaginable. You will not have the opportunity to hire anyone, Thorne advised calmly. I strongly suggest you put down your drink, Richard. Why? The patriarch demanded, his voice cracking with rising panic. Because you need to look out your front window, the director commanded softly. The telephone connection terminated with a sharp, definitive click. Richard slowly lowered the receiver. His breathing grew shallow and incredibly rapid. He forced his trembling legs to support his weight, rising unsteadily from the leather armchair. He completely ignored his wife repeating her anxious questions. He ignored his youngest daughter complaining about his sudden, bizarre behavior. The billionaire walked deliberately toward the massive floor-to-ceiling structural glass panes dominating the front architecture of his opulent living room. He reached forward and grabbed the thick silk drapery cords. With a violent, desperate pull, he yanked the heavy fabric curtains wide open. The pristine, snow-covered landscape stretching across the expansive front lawn was no longer peaceful. The thermal shielding isolating the house had momentarily blinded the authorities, but the visual reality was completely undeniable. A massive fleet of armored black federal utility vehicles entirely occupied the circular stone driveway. Dozens of highly trained government operatives clad in dark tactical gear were rapidly deploying across the manicured grass. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, surrounding every possible exit route. Flashing red and blue emergency lights reflected violently against the falling snowflakes, casting an eerie, chaotic illumination across the grand exterior pillars. A heavy armored transport violently smashed through the secondary security gates, tearing the expensive wrought iron from its stone foundations. Richard pressed his trembling hands against the cold window pane. The ultimate consequence of his boundless sociopathic greed had finally arrived at his doorstep. He watched helplessly as a tactical breaching team rushed directly toward the main mahogany entrance, carrying a massive steel battering ram. The terrifying, undeniable truth settled deeply into his bones. His brilliant, righteous daughter had completely destroyed his dark empire, and there was absolutely nowhere left to hide. The deafening crash of steel against wood echoed through the mansion, signaling the absolute end of his corrupt legacy and introducing a fresh, devastating legal nightmare that would entirely consume the remaining survivors. The massive mahogany doors at the front entrance did not merely open, they exploded inward with a deafening, catastrophic splintering of ancient wood and reinforced steel. Dozens of highly trained federal operatives surged into the grand foyer like a tidal wave of dark, tactical fabric and lethal efficiency. Their heavy combat boots trampled directly over the custom-woven silk rugs. The pristine holiday sanctuary was instantly transformed into an active criminal staging ground. Flashing emergency lights painted the expensive artwork in harsh, alternating shades of crimson and cobalt. Evelyn stood frozen near the velvet sofa. Her carefully maintained mask of aristocratic superiority finally shattered into a million jagged pieces. The matriarch had spent her entire existence manipulating high society from behind closed doors. She utilized her immense wealth to construct an impenetrable fortress against consequence. Now, heavily armed strangers were systematically dismantling her meticulously curated reality. An operative wearing a windbreaker emblazoned with bright yellow agency lettering approached her directly. He did not ask for permission. He firmly snatched the glowing cellular device right out of her manicured hand, dropping it unceremoniously into a clear plastic evidence bag.
"How dare you assault me?" Evelyn shrieked loudly. Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling, completely devoid of its usual refined cadence. "I demand to speak with the lead investigator immediately. You are illegally trespassing upon private property." The federal agent completely ignored her frantic demands. He handed her a thick stack of printed legal documents. Those papers detailed the immediate, total freezing of every single domestic and international financial account connected to the family name. Her secret offshore shell corporations were explicitly listed on the second page. The brilliant matriarch realized with sickening clarity that her brilliant escape plan was completely destroyed. The government had intercepted her massive wire transfers hours ago. Nearby, Vanessa watched the terrifying spectacle unfold with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The youngest sibling remained dressed in her expensive silk pajamas. She clutched the velvet jewelry box tightly against her chest. Her entire identity revolved around boundless consumption and elite status. She never once questioned the dark origins funding her luxurious lifestyle. An investigator methodically began sweeping the extravagant holiday gifts into large cardboard boxes, officially categorizing the imported diamonds and luxury items as proceeds of massive corporate fraud. "What are you doing with my presents?" Vanessa demanded weakly. She reached instinctively into her pocket, pulling out a sleek platinum credit card. "I can just buy everything again tomorrow. Leave my things alone." The investigator offered a grim, humorless smile. "That plastic in your hand is entirely worthless now, miss. Every line of credit is officially suspended. You cannot even purchase a cup of coffee this morning." The sheer poetic justice of the situation was absolute. The spoiled heiress, who frequently threatened hospital medical staff with financial ruin, was suddenly stripped of her only actual power. She collapsed onto the expensive rug, her superficial world collapsing rapidly around her shoulders. Richard remained standing near the shattered front window. The billionaire patriarch possessed a massive ego, forged in the brutal arenas of venture capitalism. He built his initial fortune by ruthlessly acquiring vulnerable startup companies and liquidating their assets. He firmly believed his immense capital made him completely immune to standard legal accountability. Even now, surrounded by federal agents, he refused to accept his ultimate defeat. He squared his shoulders and glared aggressively at the approaching task force commander. The lead agent was a seasoned veteran of the Financial Crimes Division. This specific officer grew up in a working-class neighborhood watching corrupt executives steal pensions without ever facing prison time. He harbored a deep personal hatred for wealthy predators who weaponized corporate structures to harm innocent civilians. The commander stepped directly into the personal space belonging to the arrogant billionaire. "I want my phone right now," Richard barked with hollow authority. "I need to contact my chief legal counsel immediately. You have made a catastrophic mistake breaking into my home. My legal team will have your badge before noon." The commander did not flinch. He produced a pair of heavy steel restraints from his tactical belt. He looked the corrupt executive directly in the eye, delivering the ultimate dramatic irony. "You cannot call your attorney," the agent stated calmly. "He is currently sitting inside a federal interrogation room downtown. He arrived voluntarily approximately 1 hour ago." Richard felt the remaining oxygen evacuate his lungs. His primary defense counsel was a notorious cutthroat litigation shark who specialized in keeping powerful men out of prison. That specific lawyer possessed intimate knowledge of every single illegal transaction buried within the corporate ledgers. "Why would he do that?" the patriarch whispered weakly, because an incredibly competent former state prosecutor named Maya Sterling hand-delivered a comprehensive dossier detailing his direct involvement in your bribery schemes. The commander explained smoothly. Your brilliant lawyer recognized the ship was rapidly sinking. He officially flipped on your entire family to secure full immunity for himself. He surrendered all the encrypted manufacturing logs and signed a sworn confession. You possess 0 allies left on this planet. The commander grabbed the wrists of the fallen billionaire. There was no physical struggle. Richard was completely hollowed out by the absolute finality of the revelation. The cold metal closed around his wrists with a definitive, echoing snap. The agent officially recited the Miranda rights, his voice cutting through the chaotic noise filling the grand parlor. The task force marched the handcuffed patriarch toward the shattered entrance. Richard stumbled slightly as his bare feet hit the freezing stone porch. The winter sun was fully visible now, casting a bright, unforgiving light upon the devastating scene. The sprawling circular driveway was lined with elite neighbors. These were the exact same powerful politicians and wealthy socialites who had attended his extravagant charity gala merely 48 hours earlier. They stood wrapped in expensive winter coats, watching his total humiliation in absolute stunned silence. Nobody offered assistance. Nobody looked away. The grand social facade he spent 30 years building was permanently erased in a matter of seconds. Miles away from the affluent disaster, Cosima sat quietly inside the secure observation deck overlooking the pediatric intensive care unit. The dedicated surgeon felt the profound, aching exhaustion settling deep within her bones. She had spent the entire night waging a desperate, terrifying war against her own bloodline. Beside her, Maya rested against the glass partition. The brilliant African-American attorney, who also served as her fiercely loyal sister-in-law, looked equally drained, but radiated a fierce, undeniable satisfaction. They had successfully navigated an impossible corporate labyrinth, utilizing undeniable facts and razor-sharp strategy to defeat a massive criminal syndicate. Neither woman cheered. There was no dramatic screaming, no celebratory dancing, and absolutely no scenes of begging or emotional breakdown. The destruction of the toxic legacy was simply a necessary, perfectly executed surgical extraction. They watched the large television monitors mounted near the ceiling. The morning news broadcasts completely abandoned their previous defamatory narratives. The screens displayed live helicopter footage showing Richard being forced into the back of a federal transport vehicle. The sensationalist headlines now focused entirely on the massive federal raid and the impending criminal indictments facing the entire corporate board. The fragile infants breathing softly inside the ward below were finally safe. The defective respiratory valves were officially secured inside evidence lockers. The immediate threat was permanently neutralized. However, the complex machinery of modern society rarely allows for a completely clean resolution. Just as Cosima closed her eyes, seeking a brief moment of peaceful rest, the primary hospital administrator burst through the observation deck doors. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. He carried a fresh stack of legal documents stamped with an unfamiliar corporate logo. Maya instantly straightened her posture, recognizing the distinct, terrifying shape of a hostile acquisition notice. "What is happening now?" the attorney asked sharply. The administrator swallowed hard. Since the federal government completely froze the pharmaceutical accounts, the hospital network suddenly lost its primary financial underwriter. A massive, predatory private equity firm operating out of New York just purchased our entire municipal debt portfolio. They are invoking an emergency liquidation clause. Cosima stared at the terrified administrator, the feeling of victory rapidly dissolving into a new, chilling reality. They are demanding we evacuate this entire wing by midnight, the administrator confessed quietly. They plan to bulldoze the pediatric center tomorrow morning to build luxury commercial developments. We saved the children from the machines, but we just lost the actual building. The massive systemic war was far from over. A completely new, incredibly ruthless corporate predator had just entered the battlefield, setting the stage for a devastating new conflict. The terrifying threat of the ruthless private equity firm demanding immediate liquidation evaporated almost as quickly as it materialized. Senator Marcus Caldwell possessed absolutely zero tolerance for Wall Street corporate vultures attempting to capitalize upon a local medical crisis. Within 3 hours of the hostile acquisition notice being served upon the exhausted hospital administrator, the seasoned politician aggressively mobilized the state health department. He explicitly invoked a rarely utilized emergency public welfare statute, temporarily placing the entire municipal medical network under absolute state protection. The aggressive New York investment bankers received a shockingly blunt telephone call from the state attorney general, firmly advising them that any attempt to foreclose upon a critical pediatric facility during an active federal investigation would trigger massive legal retaliation. The predatory executives immediately withdrew their hostile bid, retreating rapidly back into their sleek corporate skyscrapers. The physical building remained completely secure, ensuring the vulnerable patients never experienced a single moment of interrupted medical care. Several cold winter weeks rapidly passed, bringing a profound, irreversible transformation to the metropolitan landscape. The once invincible Thompson dynasty was thoroughly dismantled, reduced to a collection of highly sensationalized legal case files. Richard and his arrogant son Julian currently resided inside a maximum security federal detention center located 2 hours south of the city. The presiding federal judge had completely denied their frantic requests for preliminary bail, citing their immense offshore wealth as an unacceptable flight risk. The billionaire patriarch, who previously commanded massive corporate boardrooms with terrifying authority, was now confined within a small concrete cell containing a metal toilet and a thin mattress. His expensive tailored suits were permanently replaced by a standard-issue orange canvas uniform. He spent his days sitting in absolute, suffocating silence, completely isolated from the luxurious empire he violently constructed. Julian fared even worse behind bars. The golden air crumbled completely under the harsh realities of incarceration, weeping daily as he realized his father would never orchestrate a miraculous rescue. Evelyn and Vanessa faced an equally devastating, albeit distinct, manifestation of absolute ruin. The federal government had systematically executed the massive asset forfeiture warrants, successfully clawing back the hidden overseas funds the matriarch desperately attempted to steal. Every single bank account, property deed, and investment portfolio carrying their surname was permanently frozen and formally seized by the Justice Department to fund the upcoming victim compensation settlements. The two women were forcefully evicted from the sprawling Buckhead estate by armed federal marshals. Their elite social circle immediately severed all contact, treating the disgraced family members like highly contagious pariahs. Evelyn, who had spent decades ruthlessly dictating high society standards, was reduced to renting a cramped, incredibly modest apartment located in a completely unfashionable district. Vanessa was forced to secure actual retail employment, ringing up trivial purchases for the exact same local citizens she previously mocked. Their toxic, superficial existence was permanently shattered, leaving them to navigate a harsh, unforgiving economic reality they had actively perpetuated against others. The devastating collapse of the corrupt pharmaceutical empire left a massive structural vacuum within the global medical supply chain. However, Cosima possessed a brilliant, uncompromising vision for the future. Backed by the unwavering political support provided by Senator Caldwell, the dedicated surgeon was officially installed as the interim chief executive officer, overseeing the fractured remnants of Apex Medical. The previous corporate board of directors was entirely purged, heavily populated now by leading medical ethicists, seasoned patient advocates, and respected pediatric specialists. Cosima initiated a radical, unprecedented corporate transformation. She meticulously dismantled the toxic profit motives that originally poisoned the manufacturing processes. Under her absolute directive, the massive conglomerate officially transitioned into a strictly ethical, completely nonprofit pediatric research foundation. The primary objective was no longer generating impossible quarterly dividends for greedy shareholders. The singular mission became
developing safe, affordable, and technologically advanced respiratory equipment for vulnerable infants worldwide. Maya Sterling formally accepted the incredibly demanding position as the primary general counsel guiding the newly established foundation. The brilliant African-American attorney utilized her formidable legal expertise to aggressively restructure the entire internal corporate culture. She instituted mandatory, uncompromising safety protocols and completely transparent reporting mechanisms. Furthermore, Maya dedicated a massive portion of the seized family wealth toward establishing a comprehensive compensation fund. She personally met with every single family affected by the defective components, ensuring they received substantial financial restitution and absolute, unvarnished truth regarding the previous management failures. The seasoned lawyer operated with a fierce protective energy, permanently guaranteeing that no corporate executive could ever again prioritize profit over human life within their organization. Maya fundamentally rewrote the operational bylaws, embedding an unbreakable code of conduct into the very foundation of the new entity. Sunlight poured warmly through the massive glass windows, illuminating the expansive executive office located upon the highest floor of the foundation headquarters. Cosima stood quietly near the center of the bright room, holding a simple ceramic mug filled with fresh, hot coffee. She took a slow, deliberate sip, allowing the rich, bitter flavor to ground her in the present reality. A profound, unfamiliar sense of total peace washed over her exhausted soul. The crushing, invisible weight of her dark familial legacy was finally lifted from her shoulders. The relentless public narrative, previously manipulated to portray her as a delusional, ungrateful daughter, had completely reversed itself. National media outlets now uniformly lauded her as a brilliant, uncompromising medical hero. She was universally recognized as a ruthless protector of the vulnerable who sacrificed her own immense inheritance to save innocent lives. The vicious betrayals she suffered at the hands of her own blood relatives had ultimately forged her into an unbreakable leader. She gently placed the warm ceramic mug upon her broad oak desk and exited the quiet sanctuary of her executive suite. Cosima walked steadily down the pristine, brightly illuminated hallways connecting the administrative wing to the primary clinical spaces. She did not wear a stiff corporate suit. She wore her crisp, white physician coat, firmly signaling her enduring commitment to the actual practice of medicine. She entered the pediatric intensive care unit, the exact same room where the terrifying war had originally ignited. The massive ward hummed with the gentle, rhythmic sounds of functional, perfectly calibrated respiratory machines. The nurses smiled warmly as she passed their stations. The fragile infants rested safely within their transparent incubators, their tiny chests rising and falling with strong, uninterrupted breaths. The oppressive atmosphere of fear and mechanical failure was entirely eradicated, replaced by a radiant, healing energy. The dedicated surgeon paused near the central observation window. She looked down at the empty chair situated in the corner of her original, modest office space across the courtyard. That small room had served as her solitary bunker during the darkest hours of the conflict. She realized she no longer needed to hide from the devastating truth surrounding her corrupt bloodline. She had successfully burned the toxic empire entirely to the ground and cultivated something beautiful, resilient, and inherently good from the resulting ashes. The brutal cycle of betrayal and greed that defined the previous generation was permanently broken. Cosima smiled softly, a genuine expression of quiet victory. She turned back toward her tiny patients, moving forward with absolute clarity, knowing she had finally constructed a magnificent legacy defined entirely by unwavering integrity and the absolute preservation of human life. The long, agonizing battle was definitively concluded, and the innocent children were finally safe. The architecture of inheritance, what we truly leave behind. We spend the entirety of our lives building. We stack bricks, hoard resources, and carefully curate an unblemished public image, all under the noble guise of providing for the next generation. It is the quintessential manifestation of the American dream, the deeply ingrained desire to leave our children a kingdom vastly greater and more secure than the one we inherited. We work late, justifying our absence at the dinner table by pointing to a college fund or the deed to a larger home.
But as the metaphorical dust settles upon the absolute ruins of the Thompson corporate empire, a chilling question echoes through the empty halls of their shattered legacy. What exactly were they building? And as we watch their spectacular downfall, what are any of us truly handing down to our children when the stage lights burn out, the applause fades, and all that remains is the quiet truth of who we are behind closed doors? The illusion of protection and the cost of entitlement. Consider the tragic trajectory of Richard and Evelyn Thompson. To the casual observer, they were the flawless architects of the ultimate American family dynasty. They provided their offspring, Julian and Vanessa, with every conceivable material advantage. They secured Ivy League educations, established boundless trust funds, and bestowed a powerful surname that acted as a universal skeleton key, unlocking heavy doors before they ever had to knock. But in their relentless pursuit of corporate dominance, they fundamentally neglected the agonizingly difficult work of actual parenting. They tragically confused financial provision with character development. Within modern American culture, where success is too often measured by the square footage of an estate rather than the enduring depth of a soul, this is a devastatingly common misstep. Richard and Evelyn aggressively shielded their children from the natural consequences of their own actions. They weaponized their wealth to sever their children's emotional nerve endings. Julian was casually handed an executive title without possessing the requisite grit or moral compass to genuinely earn it. This fatal error left him a fragile shell, the exact moment real pressure was applied. Similarly, Vanessa was continuously given platinum credit cards instead of genuine emotional presence or parental boundaries. This produced a woman with $1 million wardrobe who fundamentally lacked a single ounce of empathy. By methodically removing the struggle from their lives, they completely eradicated the opportunity for psychological growth. They raised wealthy heirs, but utterly failed to raise functional adults. The burden of truth and genuine family responsibility. Genuine family responsibility, the specific kind that actually withstands the violent storms of life, is absolutely not constructed upon a fragile foundation of blind obedience or the exhausting preservation of a pristine public image. It is firmly anchored in unwavering honesty, fundamental fairness, and a rigid commitment to the truth. Traditional family structures only thrive when there is a clear, unbending moral compass established within the home, one that consistently points toward justice, even when it is personally terrifying. Cosima became the magnificent anomaly within her corrupted bloodline, specifically because she recognized a vital truth. Loyalty to her family did not require silent complicity in their devastating crimes. It required the immense courage to violently break the toxic cycle. As parents, the single most vital lesson we can ever impart is that absolute right and wrong are not malleable concepts determined by bank balances or social standing. When parents willingly manipulate the system merely to protect their children from temporary discomfort, they implicitly teach those children that the truth is something to be feared and actively avoided. They demonstrate that optics matter far more than internal integrity. The Thompsons' ultimate downfall was not simply a legal failure. It was a profound generational parenting failure. They taught their children that the outside world was simply a vast resource to be conquered, rather than a shared community to be respected. Cultivating emotional awareness as the ultimate inheritance. To successfully raise children who possess the fortitude to stand firm in the face of immense moral compromise, we must actively cultivate profound emotional awareness within our homes. This arduous process demands prioritizing difficult conversations over the glowing distractions of modern technology. It requires parents to genuinely validate their children's fears, to openly acknowledge their own parental mistakes without withdrawing affection, and to consistently demonstrate that human vulnerability is not an exploitable weakness, but rather the very core of authentic strength. Cosima survived the absolute destruction of her family not because she was financially secure,
but strictly because she possessed the emotional fortitude to look directly at the horrifying darkness festering within her own bloodline and absolutely refuse to let it define her future. She deliberately chose the agonizing, lonely path of total transparency over the heavily funded silence of complicity.
That must be the ultimate goal of parenting within any traditional structure, to raise emotionally intelligent individuals capable of independent moral reasoning. We must raise children who instinctively value justice over comfort and who fundamentally understand that their inherent worth is not tethered to a grand inheritance. Join the conversation. These sweeping stories of familial betrayal, the toxic corrosion of immense wealth, and the ultimate triumph of integrity over deep-rooted corruption are not just grand fictional dramas. They are hyper-realistic reflections of the quiet daily choices we consistently make in our own living rooms. If you find yourself deeply captivated by these unflinching explorations of human nature, and if you are drawn to compelling narratives that unravel the complex threads of family dynamics and the relentless pursuit of justice, then I strongly invite you to join our growing community. Subscribe and follow the channel Linda Vengeance. Here, we continuously dissect the shadows that lurk behind perfect societal facades, exploring the profound consequences of our actions and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. A final look in the mirror. As the final screen fades to black upon the Thompson family's catastrophic ruin, we are ultimately left staring at our own quiet reflections in the glass. Cosima walks freely through the sunlit halls of a completely redeemed institution, unburdened and profoundly free, while her arrogant father sits in the cold dark of a federal penitentiary cell, surrounded by the terrifying ghosts of his own unchecked hubris. Look closely at the kingdom you are meticulously building today. Look deeply into the faces of the children looking up to you for guidance. Are you actively teaching them how to build a massive fortress merely to keep the world out? Or are you handing them the unshakable moral compass they desperately need to navigate it with grace? The seemingly insignificant choices we make at the dinner table today echo loudly into eternity. When the definitive chapter of your life is written, what will your children truly inherit? The answer, perhaps terrifyingly, is entirely up to you.